convened after a morning session which included training and videotape that is being produced by the students at Chapman University that will be used for the Commission's public education and outreach work. We're going to start with, and just a note, some commissioners are going to be leaving the room periodically to go finish some parts of the video that they have to produce. But let's start with the Executive Director's report. Mr. Claypool? Oh, we'll do roll call again, but please note that the people that are missing, like I mentioned, are filming. So they're here, but they're temporarily out of the room, but they are present. And they're in attendance at the meeting, but temporarily out of the room.
Okay. No. Oh, do you want the roll call?
I don't think we need roll call
Okay.
for reconvening. I wasn't sure. You mentioned it, but I don't know that we need to do another roll call after lunch. Mr. Claypool?
Well, good afternoon on this stormy day. Today is Thursday, March 24th, and it's been 5 days since our last meeting at the Capitol. And in those 5 days, I'd like to report what your staff's been doing. To start with, I'd like to talk about the Department of Finance. Deborah Davis and I spoke with our program analysts at the Department of Finance, and we've completed the last spreadsheet submission that's needed, correct? The last spreadsheets to the finance. And so our $1 million augmentation request is being submitted to the legislature this week with a favorable request to release the funds to us. We should receive a response in the next week or early in the following week, but I'm very confident that we are going to receive the allocation that we've requested. Our spreadsheet requests a plan for funding through August 31st, 2011. So it actually extends into the next fiscal year. That was the way that Department of Finance wanted us to structure it, so that they would ensure that we had enough money at a minimum to get us through the redistricting process. And so at our next meeting, I'll be able to comment fully exactly how that letter was structured. Any additional funding for Commission operations beyond September 1st, 2011 will be covered in our spring finance letter, which is truly a budget change proposal. So as you all are learning state acronyms, that is referred to as a BCP. And we'll be submitting that to the Department of Finance this next week. We had intended to submit it this week, but the discussions with the Department of Finance and the structure of the letter that's being forwarded on our behalf took up the entire week, and they did not want us to, they really didn't want both of the letters going forward together. They wanted one to go forward first to cover this current year, and then the following one to follow on. They didn't want confusion as to what was being asked for at the legislature. We have been working with Department of General Services. We've run into procurement issues once again. Many of our small contracts stopped moving through DGS procurement division, including our contract for additional computers and supplies that we'll need for our public input hearings. To remedy this, we have a meeting scheduled on Monday that was actually requested by Mr. Butler, the Deputy Director of DGS, to resolve these issues. So generally, we'll run into a little glitch. We go over, we discuss, we move forward. I believe that we will iron this out, but I wanted you to be aware that that the issue of procurement remains. When we have time, we will go back and try to get the delegated authority for contracting on our own, and this should be a very high priority when this commission considers amendments to constitutional amendments, because your next commission that replaces you should be able to be exempt from this entire process. It's been the single greatest bottleneck for your staff in this process. We'll obviously keep the chair and vice chair, which will be Chairman or Commissioner Ontai, Chairman Ontai, and Vice Chair Gary, informed as we move forward. We'll also be working with the Finance Administration Committee to let you know how we're doing with this. So we'll keep the commission apprised. We've submitted our contract for our line drawer to DGS as required, and is currently being reviewed by the Office of Legal Services, which is a different branch, and we're extraordinarily helpful. By the way, I can't tell you how helpful the Office of Legal Services was in not only providing us guidance in both our VRA and our technical consultant contracts, but just being available at a moment's notice to review questions that were submitted or questions we had about the actual process. We're optimistic that the contracts will be approved. We expect a response early next week. And it is our understanding that Q2 can begin work immediately after that approval is received from the Office of Legal Services.
And excuse me, what was the projected timing on that?
We're hoping for early next week.
Okay.
It could be sooner, but and certainly if it came tomorrow, we would tell you. But we have to assume that it will be in the first 1 to 3 days of next week. Commission staffing. After advertising our positions for first administrative assistant position, we received 3 applications. We had 1 earlier in the week, and then 2 that came in yesterday. We were not able to put that on the DGS website. So for a standard state vetting, we sent that out through our 1,300 email list to hit the widest possible public viewing that we could. We couldn't get it onto the DGS website, and we're hoping to get the second one, because each time we go to post a position with DGS, it becomes an issue again of whether or not we can have the position, whether or not the position is authorized by finance or the state controller's office. So in this particular case, we needed this staff person as quickly as possible. So we've gone ahead and filled the first position with the first person that applied. We'll continue to work with the Department of General Services and to establish the second position, and then we'll have both of the positions run through the State Controller's Office after approval by the Department of Finance. Finance has to say, yes, we're authorized to have the person. State Controller's Office then keys the position in so that they'll actually be paid. The individual that applied earlier was encouraged to do so by Janice, has known Lon, and I'm going to say this, Leach, I'm sorry. Lon, all I know is Lon. Lon has a marketing and finance degree, has extensive experience in production process and marketing. His strengths reside in sales, organization, and technology. And I will be recommending that the commission vote to hire Lon as our administrative assistant to travel with the commission during the input hearings. We will complete our interviews of the 2 additional applicants early next week and make our recommendations to you at the next commission hearing. Clearly, as we look at these individuals, if we find one that meets is a good fit with this commission, we're going to bring them on with a personal procurement contract, as we've done with almost everyone else, so that we can get them into the process, and then we'll replace that procurement contract with the salaries that you've authorized at this time. Code of Conduct, Hiring Procedures, and Communications Protocol. This is required by the Constitution. It was in Prop 11, and it was also in Prop 20. It requires that you have this in place for your staff. Different people have taken different parts of it. I wrote the Code of Conduct. Marion Johnston of our staff wrote the Hiring and Firing Procedures, and our Communications Director wrote the Communications Protocol. We've delivered a copy of the preliminary procedures manual to the members of the Finance and Administrative Advisory Committee for their review and comment. Staff will be taking their comments and revising the procedures per their comments for a presentation and decision at the next business meeting. That's why we haven't distributed it fully to the Commission, because we'd like to get that input and have as completed a process and project as possible. The input meeting calendar. We completed a staff revision of the calendar for the input meetings and submitted it both to you, the commissioners, and to Q2 once we knew that we had a line drawer for their review and comment. As directed, we removed many of the dates to weekend times to the extent possible. We removed Holy Week and other holidays just to make sure that we could keep those dates open. So what we ended up with was a revision where slightly less than half the meetings were on weekends and slightly more were on weekdays. Now this...
Are those evenings?
And so the actual format hasn't been set. We just decided the days and knew that the technical committee and then the full commission would be giving us directions as to how the input hearing should be structured. Q2 submitted suggestions for revising the calendar around a regional approach for the input hearings that would allow more compact travel and the ability of the line drawers to use teams to begin drawing the lines for one region as soon as a regional meeting was completed. This is a very efficient way to process this, so we will first of all be taking their considerations into account, and then the commissions, to try to get a product that we can all at least agree is the best that we can possibly do under these circumstances. Once the maps are altered, we'll finish gathering, so these maps could then be altered from the regional meetings, and then we could gather public input from organized groups at Northridge prior to releasing our first draft maps. So it keeps the same concept. We're trying to keep the same 3 draft concept that we have presented to you, but working around the regional approach. Staff will gather all comments from the Technical and Outreach Advisory Committee and the commissioners and make a final revision to the calendar schedule following full commission comments on Friday. Now what we'd like to do, we're going to be in the Technical and Outreach meeting today, and we'll take whatever comments we have and whatever comments have been submitted at this point by Q2, and we'll try to get that into a draft this evening as quickly as possible, so that you have a map that is as close to being completed as possible for tomorrow. It is very important to us that if it's possible for this commission to complete an approval of that final calendar tomorrow, that will give the staff the maximum amount of time to start planning the different venues that need to be planned for us to get out on the road and start doing what you're being paid that $300 a day to do. We do have some recommendations from staff that all decisions being made by the Commission regarding locations and date for input meetings be made using some principles. We'll present those principles to the technical committee, but they involve just making sure our timing, that we have a mix of evenings and weekends based on what's common and convenient to local areas, that the public places be readily known to people living in the area, and when possible, we get them at a reduced fee or without charge. Transportation should always be near a freeway and served by public transportation if it's possible. Now, there might be some venues where there is no possibility of that, but it is a major consideration. Accessibility to the disabled is always a major priority of your staff when looking at venues. Schedule order, meetings should be clustered and completed in one region before moving to the next. Convenience, best efforts should be made to minimize the total time from one venue to the next with reasonable proximity to hotels. We would ask that, to the extent possible, staff and commissioners minimize the travel expenses as much as possible. And finally, that every one of these venues have audio-visual live streaming capabilities. If we take these principles, as we're going to recommend to the technical and outreach committees, into account, I'm sure we're going to find high-quality venues for these public input meetings. On the input meetings themselves, Janice and Lon have spent the last 3 days identifying venues for the first public input hearings that were approved by you, and will continue to do so through our next meetings. So far, the overwhelming response has been positive, and we remain optimistic that many of the venue costs will be provided at a reduced cost to the Commission. The venues identified so far are compliant with the principles previously mentioned. Once we have this formalized calendar in place, I just feel it's necessary to say that it will be very important that we get Commission members to commit to these different events as far in advance as possible. Early commitment by the commissioners will allow venues to be planned with a minimum of wasted expense to the Commission and to the organizers providing the Commission with free services. It will allow airline tickets to be purchased well in advance of the venue at significant discounts. Typically, if we get out ahead by 2 weeks, we'll cut the cost down to about a third. Allows block booking of hotels for state rates. 10 or more rooms is typical, and allows advanced reservations for rental cars to ensure that they're available. And we would like in that regard to ask the commissioners to consider, as they know who's traveling in different areas, to identify other commissioners that they can drive with, so we take as few cars on the road as possible. Clearly, if there's a need, we have the money in the budget for the commissioners to all have a car themselves, but if we pull up with 16 cars, it'll probably make us look a little extravagant.
As long as it's not a private jet.
There we go. The staffing plan for the input meeting is tentatively scheduled for 4 Commission staff. This would include 2 staff directing the public at the door and assisting with the public with the use of the Commission's toolkit to aid in providing public submissions in the form that is useful to the Commission and the Q2 staff, and 2 staff working with Q2 staff and the Commission, taking public submissions and cataloging the submissions. In addition, as we're out on the road, the 4 staff would split up. Two are going to leave very early in the morning, head to the next venue, and just take a good look and make sure that it's ready for you to arrive. And so that's our strategy. If anyone has a better one, they need to let us know. But that's the way the 4 of us are going to work for you. Commission and staff communications. The shortened time frame between last week's meeting and today's meeting created some confusion on the posting of the agenda, and for that I have to apologize. We should have handled it better for our chair, but this is going to become even more problematic as we plan our business meetings for days when we also have public input hearings. We all anticipate that the number of items that each advisory committee will have for discussion and action will diminish as we complete the planning for input and line drawing and actually begin the process. However, there are going to be many issues that need to be addressed and resolved as we're moving through the input hearing phase. To facilitate this process, I'm going to recommend that we amend one of our adopted procedures and consider 4 others. The amendment, we have the current procedure that all communications between commissioners and commission staff shall be sent through the commission's current chair and vice chair as an established practice. I'd like to amend it to say that in the event that there is a need for the commission to meet an agendized date that was previously being held but not necessarily actually scheduled us for to meet, so like Friday in this case, that it's going to be the responsibility of the chair and the vice chair to inform the remaining commissioners of the additional dates and locations in coordination with myself. So the 3 of us will take the responsibility to let you know as early as we possibly can that that we're going to have to move into that additional date so that you can make the change. Hopefully it'll be in time for people to actually make the change without making reservations, but we understand that it just causes stress and we want to avoid that. The second thing that I'd like to propose is that the commission staff will only contact the chairs of the advisory committees at the specific direction of the chair and vice chair, and all information required of the committee chairs will be directed back to the chair and vice chair and then provided to staff. The single point of contact is designed to ensure that each chair and vice chair are aware of staff responsibilities, and it's going to minimize confusion and conflicting directions to staff. So this actually is a little bit out of order, but I would like the commission to have, to consider selecting permanent chairs for the advisory committees. And those individuals will be solely responsible for accumulating and providing agenda items to the current chair and vice chair, who will in turn provide that information to commission staff within the timeframes established previously. And I'm going to remind you that policy is 72-hour deadline for recommendations to the chair and vice chair, 48-hour deadline for chair, vice chair instructions to staff, and a 24-hour deadline for posting and delivering the expanded agenda to the commission. So we're going to try to, as much as we can, to hold on to that, because as we're mixing these business meetings and these input hearings, we don't want the business meetings to get lost, and we certainly don't want to miss agendizing something when we have something that's important for this commission to consider and give staff direction on. The other thing that, fourth thing that I would suggest is that the committee advisory chairs will have the responsibility to recommend agenda items at the end of each business session for the next business session. So we have some good idea. We're going to come out of this session with ideas of what needs to be on the agenda next week, rather than leaving quickly and not having that moved to staff. I would like to have that moved as quickly to us so we can start expanding the agenda before this session's even over. The committee advisory chairs will also be responsible for working with the chair and vice chair to recommend additional agenda items leading up to the next business session while meeting our procedural deadlines. So these chairs are going to be very important to us in not only giving us direction at the end of the session, but picking up and directing the agenda items as we move forward, so that we can flesh out the next agenda, not put all that pressure on the rotating chair and vice chair. The last thing I would say is that the commission, or that the committee chairs shall have an interim authority to commit staff to projects subject to full approval of the commission at our next scheduled session. And this would be similar to the authority that we gave Commissioner Filkins-Weber earlier, where we said, you know, if a decision has to be made for something, you make it, and then we'll approve it. You know, well, actually, you were given the full authority to make the decision. This would be the authority to make a decision subject to approval. What we want to get away from in this particular case, and a good example was a comment by a speaker earlier, and I'll discuss it with you here. Your staff reviews all public comments coming in to make sure that that there's nothing inappropriate, obscene, or anything else that would post up that would be an embarrassment to the commission if it were on your website. This was a standard practice with the Bureau of State Audits as well. We have received two controversial emails that we did not post, and we didn't post them because we felt that they met that criteria. However, the gentleman that spoke made a good point, and that point was that we can't appear to censor, particularly not staff, on your behalf. These are decisions that should be made by this commission, and we should forward those to someone for their review to make a determination in the interim. I would propose that that person would be whoever the permanent chair of the Legal Advisory Committee was, to say, we're posting 99.9% of the stuff that's coming in, but this we don't know. We want the commission to rule on this, because it is, after all, your responsibility to direct your staff. Then that decision could be made, and then when we came back to, and then I would assume that whoever that individual was would also have a conversation with the chair and vice chair. And then when we came to a full commission meeting, you could discuss it and decide whether the appropriate decision to be made. That's up for the commission, but I would like these chairs to have that type of authority, so that when we need something from a medium to a high-level decision, anywhere in there, that it's a decision of the commission and not a decision of staff. So those are the things that I would propose. I would also, those are more procedural issues. I would also think that it might be appropriate for the commission to consider appointing the executive director, myself, and Kurt Miller, your chief counsel, as single points of contact with Q2 and the VRA attorneys for communication between your staff and those entities. I think that's the appropriate place for us to be. So that's the end of the 4 days that we've spent since we saw you last. Questions?
So, Mr. Claypool, do you want us to go through these suggestions? Some of them are amendments to existing policies, if you will. They're not in any reg, but policies that we've established for ourselves, and others are adoption of new policies. Would you like us to go through? Are you recommending that we go through this now and make some decisions, or what was your intent?
My intent was to bring them out now. If it's acceptable to you, to pass them out to you, as we'll have to print them, pass them out to you so that you can consider them individually, have a discussion possibly tomorrow in full session, and then you can approve or disapprove those items that you wish.
Okay. Commissioner DeJulia?
Maybe Mr. Claypool answered it. I was just going to, I would like to, before anybody considers it, there's a number of commissioners that aren't here, so as long as your intention was for us to make a decision tomorrow after review, I just would hope that we get everyone's input.
I wanted to catch your ear early,
Yeah.
and then we'll pass those out. I'll try to get over and get those done, and then out to you and out to the public, and then we'll
figure out where to put it on the agenda.
tomorrow. I think
For
it should be a
tomorrow.
fairly short item.
Okay.
That was my only other question was, I know some of these that we've had in our discussion, outreach and technical, some of these might fall in those categories, so we were planning on discussing them. Would that be contradictory to what you need, or should we just wait until tomorrow? For an example, I was going to say the calendar, but that's not the other amendments you're talking about.
Right. For the actual amendments, I think that these are more how this commission runs its business. The calendar is a separate issue, and I know we're going to discuss that now in outreach and technical. But for the basic procedural issues of knowing who staff goes to and making sure that from the public standpoint, all the decisions that involve this commission be made by this commission, those would be just in those 5 things I recommended, and I would like just to have that voted on tomorrow.
Yes, Commissioner Filkins-Weber and then Commissioner Baraba.
I have 2 questions. So based on your proposed changes, it would be recommended that the committees, when they meet today, designate who would be the permanent chair, or is this backwards? Because what if the commission doesn't agree that the advisory committee should have a permanent chair? So I can see that we would be getting into a situation tomorrow when we discuss your recommendations that if the commission as a whole has not discussed that issue, then we're back to square one because we won't have a designated chair for the advisory committees when we look at your proposals tomorrow. You see what I'm saying?
I should have discussed this with Kirk first. I see your point, yes.
Well, I think that's manageable. Oh, the role that's been described is what I would call more of a lead than a chair, and it's principally for the purposes of communication, facilitation, as opposed to a larger role. Now, with that in mind, I think a case can be made that if the committees were to select that individual today in their next meeting, and for whatever reason the board or the commission chose not to follow that path, I would hope that would be a disappointment that the lead commissioner could accept, and we'd be where we are. But on the other hand, if it's something that is embraced, then we'd be well along and could implement that.
So I would, do you have a follow-up question, Commissioner? No.
Not on this
Okay,
issue,
yeah.
on the second.
Well, just on this issue. 'Cause,
Yeah, no, that's what I was saying, follow-up to her first question.
the only reason I raise it is because and I'll turn the floor over to Commissioner Dye, because I do know that if she has any comments on that issue, because I know that it's to facilitate communications with staff and the designated chair. So I don't have a particular problem with a designated person that would communicate. But I think it's something that needs to be decided now so that we can facilitate communication. When we make decisions on your proposals tomorrow, and when we adjourn tomorrow, that those individuals are identified, which I suspect would have to be identified by the committees that are meeting today. That's
Well, and it, actually, we could simply, we can continue to operate through 2 more weeks of not having this lead person identified. If it were, this is most key for when we go out and we start actually having the input hearings, and we really need to be able to go to one person. So Rob was correct. The Public Advisory Committee has already met. The Finance Administrative Committee isn't meeting. If we could simply agree in principle tomorrow as to what path or which one of these that we were going to actually follow, then we could identify this lead/chair in our next set of meetings, and just continue to work closely with the chair and the vice chair, and we actually were working through the people we thought were chairs, but were actually liaisons. We could continue to identify those. We just want that your staff wants a structure that they understand, and mainly, and I can't emphasize this enough, we want to assure the public that we don't make your decisions for you. You make your own decisions. We want to follow your instruction, and we want to make sure that we're acting on your behalf as you wish us to act, and that's why we'd like this put into place.
okay. Thank you. So we can just put that discussion off for tomorrow. I think that sounds good. I do have one other question. Mr. Miller, did you review the code of conduct and the conflict code that's being proposed by staff that I suspect we'll take a look at once?
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Barova?
Yes, the last point you made about both you and the legal counsel being the point of contact with the consultants. What happens when we get into, say, June, and we're in the commission directs the
Can't hear you.
our session? I want to know the intent of why would we have to go through the staff then every time we wanted to get into a meeting when we were in the process of drawing the lines?
No, this was, and I should apologize, this was strictly a procedural for staff. So staff, this is part of the communication protocol for your staff, not for your commission. Your staff,
okay.
so your staff are identified. Kirk is the one who works with the VRA. I'll be the one who, for staff, who communicates with Q2.
Okay.
And then when you, so if you have directions for staff, for Q2, it would roll through me and roll out to them. But it doesn't pertain to you. It's just for the protocol.
So I would suggest that everybody think a lot about this today. I know this was a challenging agenda because there were so many things that have to be decided at this meeting that we couldn't put off because they deal with the hearings that we're about to embark. And we had a lot of ideas from people, and we did go off script in terms of who was relaying what to whom. And I also understand this issue that you're raising, Mr. Claypool, about for everything to be clearly a commission decision and not a staff decision. So let's think about that. I think the only problem I anticipate with if we have a committee chair / lead that makes decisions in between meetings rather than the staff making those decisions, that presents another set of problems about who a decision maker is. That's not, that isn't the full commission or the full advisory committee. So I think that when we think, I don't want to have us go into that right now, but I really want us to think about that because I think that has a whole other, might bring on a whole set of other problems.
Can I ask for a point of
Yeah.
clarification on that? And as a point of clarification, do you envision the lead being someone, I understand, I think Commissioner Blanco is raising a very good point here, where could the lead discuss the issue that's been brought to the lead by staff with, let's say, one other commissioner in that group, but the decision be made by the lead, so that the lead could have a little additional buffer about the discussion, whether it's even appropriate for the lead to make a decision or to wait for the full commission? I'm just wondering if there's a way to
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, maybe Mr. Miller, you can look at this a little bit, because
well-
you know, this is obviously all because of of our constraints, you know,
Well,
with the Brown Act,
just-
that we're having to
To
do
answer,
this.
to answer the
Yeah.
question, though, the answer to that is yes.
I think even if there were two, it still poses some, I mean, if it's a minor technical process decision, I think everybody gets comfortable. If all of a sudden a decision is made to take something off an agenda, then it starts to get closer to the kind of things that will make other commissioners uncomfortable because they were decided by a small group. So I just think we need to flesh that out tomorrow.
And I should be more clear. It was always envisioned that, for instance, with this conversation about an item that shouldn't be, that we don't believe should be posted, it was always intended that we would take it, if it were the lead with the Legal Advisory Committee, that always the chair and the vice chair would be included in the conversation. This is the foremost, or the most important part of our procedure right now is it always goes through the chair and the vice chair. It always comes back through them.
Right.
That's important. So I would think that we have three involved in the conversation, not just one.
Okay, so let's just put our thinking caps on tomorrow about that. And I have one question for you, Mr. Claypool, but it's also an agenda issue for tomorrow. If we are going to adopt the calendar after the intense meeting, the joint outreach and technical committees discussed today, and that you look at, and it comes back to us tomorrow, when will be the time for public comment before we vote to adopt that calendar, and how much time will people have to look at that? Because I know that this is an item of interest, and, you know, we've received a lot of public comment already about both weekends versus nights, and even regions and frequency of meetings. So I think this is one of those items that we've sort of discussed in the past that rises to the level where you don't want to just have it brought to us and then we talk about it with 4 people in this room and don't allow for time for comment. So how would we accommodate that?
Well, we already have the commission's approval for the first 2 weeks of April. So
Say that again?
we already have the commission's approval to schedule the first 2 weeks of April. Our issue really becomes just the 14-day noticing period, because by the time we meet again, I don't know, you know, we have to have venues. We can either have the meeting as early as possible tomorrow, and then that isn't much of a public comment period if it happens tomorrow, or you can give us the authority to schedule the first month, and the public would have the option of reviewing the last 2 months or 3 months of the schedule. I mean, because of the 14-day noticing period, I don't know any other way to move around that. Kurt?
I have to do this video thing, so can you take over just this item, and I'll be right back.
Was not a legal question, but from a practicality perspective, I think that's a good suggestion. On the one hand, there is a need to approve a comprehensive schedule because it organizes the work and it permits us to find the venues that are going to work best both for the commission and for the public. If you don't feel comfortable taking the giant step, if you will, to a fully approved calendar through August, I think it would be very helpful to at least feel comfortable going through April with the idea then that we'll publish that larger calendar on the internet. That'll permit very broad input very quickly, and then come back and hopefully it's well received and either it's approved as posted or there are changes that are made as a result of the posting. But I think that would give the commission essentially the best of both worlds, which is some track action early on to start meetings and select venues, to be thinking seriously about the downstream meetings and get public input at the same time.
Commissioner Dye.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why we're discussing this now. Isn't this the major topic of the Technical and Outreach Committee meeting? I mean, I would like to hear from them before the full commission discusses it.
Yes, I think we can push that on to the Technical Outreach Committee for discussion and bring it back to the full commission. But the question being, just to summarize, if we wanted to give the public some time to look at the schedule, say after we've made some full discussion tomorrow, then what are the alternatives? One alternative possibly is to have a business meeting on either April 9th, 7th, or 8th. I believe we have 2 business days set aside before the actual input hearings. So we could possibly have that as a final decision point on the final schedule.
Absolutely, and and I don't want to preempt the technical and outreach committees here. The only thing I would like to say is our maps, our original calendar went out last session. We've made a revision, and that's been reviewed. We've taken a great deal of public comment into consideration, and I would hope that any public comment that would occur between now and then would have to be very serious to move us offline from where we're at, because we're going to take whatever you approve, and even though we're having public comment, we're going to be contacting these venues or these areas and saying, if this occurs, what can you do for us? Because we don't have any leeway there. We have to start moving these next couple of weeks to really line this up so that you go to all the places you're supposed to go to.
Okay.
Because, Mr. Claypool, essentially the only changes you've made, you didn't make anything real substantive. You just moved things out to the weekend. Areas weren't changed that much, so the public has actually had access to this calendar for some time.
They have. Actually, the second calendar on the weekends, we did make changes directly because of public comment. We moved Auburn down to Rancho Cordova because there was a comment about the Sacramento area. We made some adjustments there. So we have made adjustments that answered some public comment.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's continue this discussion later on. We can now close this discussion and begin our 2 o'clock advisory, outreach, and technical committee meeting, unless there's something else you want to.
Did you want to get some agenda topics?
Commissioner Yao.
Next meeting from the commission here, because we need to post that agenda out.
The meeting,
Okay.
that's scheduled for April the 7th. The latest date that we can post the agenda is midnight tonight. Are we going to have an opportunity to come back and finalize that agenda before we close today?
Don't know, Dan.
Thank you, Commissioner Yao, because that's what we were just discussing, that we need to have agenda items coming out of today. We can post the agenda later on, but we need to have those items. So each one of the advisory committees and the upcoming chair and vice chair need to be thinking very quickly about what we're going to post for that meeting.
Okay, all right, so that decision has to be made
Now,
today.
the only other thing is we do have, legal has also, Kirk has been working on several items that he should comment on, and I believe that Rob has the communications report that he needs to post as well.
Thank you.
Well, I do have a follow-up report. Having selected VRA Council Friday, I got together with them on Monday and had, I thought, a very constructive meeting. But in the essence of saving time, that's really a report I was going to be making in the Legal Advisory Committee. Maybe it ought to just occur there and then come forward.
Rob.
And I can do the same with the Public Information Advisory Committee.
All right. So we'll commence with the Technical and Outreach Advisory Committees meetings at 2:10. And I believe we'll be meeting here. Yes, let's do that at 2:15, our meeting.
Yes.
Are there anyone there out in the public that would like to make a comment? We'd invite you to come down. Seeing none. All right, we'll take a 15-minute break. 5-minute break. as advisory committee, joint advisory committee, meeting technical and outreach subcommittees to discuss the two major items and a couple other items as well, but the two major ones. Oh, it's not on.
Can't hear you.
Oh, it is on. Can you hear me now? How's that?
Can you put your laptop down? Thanks. There we go. Thank you.
It's probably blocking my sound waves. Okay, so we've got two major items that we want to talk about, and then we have a number of other issues, but the two that we want to talk about are the scheduling, or the scheduling for the hearing inputs, and the second is the actual format for each hearing. And we have our Q2 consultant here, Anna, and we're going to ask you to...
You're not,
I see, I see.
Carmen's going to be here?
Yes, and then go ahead and frame it.
Okay.
We've got it all done.
I'd like to take a moment, I think both for the commissioner's sense, because there's been an opportunity for a representative from Outreach, which was Gil, a representative from Technical, which was myself, and a representative from Legal, though was also serving as a hat in Technical, which was Angelo, but because it was no more than two with Technical, we were okay. We had an opportunity to have a conversation with Q2. We had an opportunity to have a conversation with Q2, so we went through as a point of reference for us in discussing this issue to get some more information. But I think before we start, it's very important, as you notice on the agenda, there are 11 items under the technical outreach. I think that what I've done is tried to, in talking with Gil, group them into big topics, but based on that, we have about 15 minutes per issue to talk about things, and that's not a lot, so I think we need to kind of keep the ball rolling. But
We have to.
what's very important right now for us, and it's combined technical and outreach, is to know that we are not going to be able to, at this point, we do not have enough time to work out a significant degree of details, but what we are hoping that we can do as an advisory committee is to establish a set of principles, a protocol. We give the direction for staff and consultants for which they could follow our guidance so that they can come back to us at another time with those details. So having said that, I think a good place to start would be the calendar, as Commissioner Ontai had mentioned. And this would fall under agenda items, I believe. One, which was a framework for input hearings, and two, the locations and times for input hearings. So I think, just to summarize what we're aiming for, is for us as the advisory committees to review the latest draft version of the outreach, and we were just received from Q2, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Henderson, that this is a proposed, maybe there's some, I haven't really looked at it closely, we just received it, there may be some slight modifications, and you could expand on those, but I don't know if, Dan, is this up for the public yet, or did we just receive this?
We just received it.
Okay.
We've distributed it here, but it is not online.
It's not online yet, so we apologize about that, but hopefully if you do have the other version, you can follow along. So let me just take a moment for Ms. Henderson to explain some of those changes, and then I think it's up to us to, in general, see if we agree with this and are able to make a recommendation to the full commission regarding our discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner DeJulia.
Could I ask a question before we start?
Yes.
Is this then based on previous schedules that we've developed?
It is largely based on that, and as Mr. Claypool said earlier, what we tried to do was rearrange some of the order of some of the
Sure.
meetings
Okay.
in a way that, and I'll explain that right now, and if I don't answer your question, please ask me again.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
So basically, when we were thinking about the way to structure input hearings, what occurred to us is that a good way to approach it would be in such a way that would facilitate line drawing. And so what you'll see is that, for the most part, we use the original dates that were on the calendar, but we rearranged the locations, the order in which we'd be visiting the locations that were there. So, for example, we kept, what we decided to do was to keep the first two meetings, because we understood that those were already very far along in the planning. And we suggest moving a meeting for Region 6, and also adding the The one addition we have in April is actually on April 13. It's adding a meeting for Region 5. Under the original calendar that I saw, we didn't have a meeting for Region 5, so we wanted to make sure to be able to hit each of the regions. In the proposal that Q2 put forward, we talked about splitting the state into 4 regions in terms of doing an initial line drawing. That way we'll have one principal person working on each of the 4 regions, the 4 maps in those regions, along with some other staff. One of the regions that we have a person working on includes regions 9, 5, and 6. So by doing the input meetings for regions 9, 5, and 6 together, instead of scattering them out throughout the 2 months, that gives us an opportunity to assemble the information that's given at the hearing, the public input, provide that information to the commission, and hopefully get direction from the commission about how to start drawing the lines in that region of the state. As you go along, you'll see that the next area in this map on April that we're talking about visiting is Region 4. That's the LA County region. A lot of input is going to be needed from LA. And so we talk about finishing up LA as a group, Region 4, and then doing the same type of system where we would be able to assemble the information that's provided from the public at the input hearing, provide it to the commission, and then hopefully receive guidance from the commission about how to start drawing the lines in that region. The next region that we're talking about is regions 1, 2, and 3. We have that going on in the first 2 weeks of May. Once those are done, again, we would assemble the information that we receive from the public input hearing, provide it to the commission, and ask for the commission's direction how to draw the line. And then the last meetings will be regions 7 and 8, and the same process, assembling the information, presenting it to the commission, and then getting direction from the commission about how to start drawing the lines. We left the 3 Northridge meetings intact as they were, so the same as the last map. The other change that we have in here is that we would like to push back the release date for the first draft of maps by a couple days. And we think that will give us more of an opportunity to come up with integrated state maps. We still have I guess it's 6 or 7 days of commission meetings with you all telling us how to draw the lines. But we just think a couple days will allow us to take care of everything we need to really put forward the best possible first drafts of the maps. That in turn pushes back a couple of the meetings in the mid-June range, but then from there on, the schedule is all the same. So the July and August schedules are the same as they were. The only thing that we did in July is originally during the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th of July, there were specific locations selected for the input hearings. We thought that we might want to hold off on that, the specific locations, so that we know which areas of the state we really need to be visiting during that stage in redistricting.
This also gives the public an opportunity to.
Exactly,
fill
that's
it.
you. That's you.
Any commissioners have some questions or comments about both of these calendars?
Just a clarification, because I know in the latest drafts that the staff had put together, there's a number of places where it goes, Los Angeles / Pico Union / Watts, which are not, LA covers a lot of territory.
Yes.
Pico Union and Watts are not close to each other, but is that just one site, or is it covering all those areas, or is those actually 3 sites or 2 sites?
No, originally, the way that came about was we knew we wanted something in central Los Angeles. And so we spoke at that time with Doug Johnson and the Rose Institute. And I said, if you're in Los Angeles, if you were going to put a site between 2 groups where you need the public input, where would you put it? And he said, well, I would put it somewhere between Pico Union and Watts so that both of those groups had the opportunity to meet. We just never pulled the Los Angeles out, and we thought that it would be helpful for some individuals who might not know where Pico Union or Watts were. So it was just the general geographic central location area.
Okay. And I think that sort of we've got the they don't seem to be too far away, they're not 50 miles apart necessarily, but they're in the same vicinity for the most part. By LA standards, that's a lot of miles, but
Yeah, and I should say that in this draft map, that I've been referring to, it's, it's a little bit shorthandy. So it was the locations. You can refer back to the map that's already online to get more specific locations. And in the June meetings, I just put by region. I figured that we could, establish a specific location in the region.
I like that.
Later. What I would recommend, though, is that whatever location we choose in the regions, that it be centrally located, easy to get to, all the things that have been mentioned already today.
In June, where we have the commission directing the line drawer from the 1st to the 6th, and there's these 3 days, I assume that's what you're looking at. You need some time to. Okay, so, but then who is involved in the releasing of the map?
I think that's you, but
Bobby, would we see it on the 9th, or would we see it on the 10th?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I mean, when would we stop giving directions on this, according to this calendar, we stopped giving directions on the 6th, and then on the 10th, we're releasing it. So would we have seen what was happening on the 7th, 8th, and 9th?
Yeah,
but you're actually studying that during that time.
Yes, and we can fill that in with more commission meetings. It was mostly that I was just trying to put a date down for the release of the maps.
Actually, on this particular case, the way it was, we had the maps coming out, I believe, and I don't have the calendar in front of me. What was the date that our?
It was June 6th.
We had it on June 6th. Okay, so we had it on June 6th, and then we had you going right back out in that following week. So, after we had the 5-day public review process. So this envisions it kind of pushing it over, and as Anna said, they kind of had to move some of our dates and push them together.
So 7th, 8th, and 9th will still be in communication.
7th, 8th, and 9th, I would think so. That's.
Yeah.
I was thinking from the public's point of view, it looks kind of strange that there's nothing going on.
Oh, and yeah, Northridge was our demarcation between pre and post.
I meant on June.
Right, and then we had you, like I said, having the public input there, and then going right back out in, I believe, 13th and 14th. Yeah, so we had 12th, 13th, 14th, and now that's been pushed over.
And actually, this is really just a working draft, so.
Well, and I think that's part of the point to some degree is we'll have to make a decision if we want to direct staff and Q2 to work together, if we want to adopt just one. That's something for us to maybe make some recommendations. But I did want to ask Dan, in terms of we have already, as I understand it, we've approved the first 2 weeks of April.
Right.
Even though I think the recommendation makes sense for us to go in this regional approach so that we can get the feedback in one region at one time so we can process it along the way. But how, if we as a commission choose to do that, can we make revisions that at earlier adoption of the first 2 weeks? Or does that, A, does that impact staff? B, can we do that? Maybe I should check with Commissioner and chat with the parliamentary procedures. We just choose.
Well, we can always change. I mean, for noticing purposes, I think we're kind of stuck with the ones that are 2 weeks away. I think as you move forward, we can always say we're making a revision.
Which would be the.
It sounds visible in particular.
So fortunately for us, Reading and Yuba City were in our regional plan, and they're booked.
Yes.
Right.
And it's in this plan as well. We did not have the next three, Rancho Cordova, Santa Rosa, or Oakland, Richmond, booked. So we can switch, we can switch over to this plan if you say, you give us the authority, then we would book out as you see it here.
I think we can just recommend, if that's what we want to recommend, we could simply recommend that to the full commission and just vote on it at some point.
Okay.
Later, or today, or tomorrow.
Because your staff is flexible.
Oh, yeah, and as long as you haven't booked everything, as long as we're not losing a couple $1,000 by having booked something, I don't think even then, I'm not even sure, depending on what we really want to do.
So move it along, shall you make that recommendation, and let's just take a vote on it. As a recommendation to the full commission.
Commissioner Parvenu maybe has one comment real
Yes,
fast?
Commissioner Parvenu.
No, I have a comment about the rest of April. I want to finish this first.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just take it right away so we don't waste time.
Well, so I think we would have to have a motion in terms of amending our previous motion from the last meeting regarding the first 2 weeks of April. So that has to be, I'm sure that has to be a formal item. I'd support that.
How about a vote of acclamation? Just say aye, everybody.
Aye.
All right,
You two.
that's going to be our recommendation.
Okay, so we will make that recommendation to end that, the week, the 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay. Then, should we talk about the remainder of the calendar in terms of, I think, again, there's a few minor revisions to what staff had presented, but do we as advisory committees feel comfortable in recommending to the full commission the adoption? I shouldn't say, let me put it this way. Should we recommend to the commission a level of, that we allow them, staff and consultants, to work together, and that if there are minor revisions, say a change in venue or something on a minor scale, that they can make those decisions, and that if it's something major like a switch in regions or something along those lines, that would come back for the commission to review, as well as this is a working calendar as we go along the process. As we're going to learn a lot as we start these processes, and we would make the recommendation for acceptance of this calendar pending the option to review it and make changes as necessary to vote on the changes as needed. Does that sound?
Does that sound all right? Commissioner Parvenu?
I did, although I had a concern, wanted to raise a concern which goes to coverage of a region in the the April-May time period, and this has been brought up in public comment as well, because, and I work in San Jose, so I'm mindful of this, which is, Salinas, if you sort of look at the map, is sort of the geographic point that you might cover the South Bay and Santa Clara County area, but given the population size of that county and where other things are going, and I think, as I recall, San Jose was on a post-release of the first draft site.
Yes, that's correct.
But there's been a concern raised by the public that there ought to be one before draft maps are released. So Q2, I think, did not incorporate into yours. So, and that's sort of the decision we have to make. But right now we're not doing that. But I simply raised it as a concern. Did you think about that at all? Or is it
Yeah, I did, but we were mostly just trying to structure the regions. One possibility might be to look at the maybe the San Ramon meeting.
That's the one I was sort of thinking, because just in terms of, again, just of geographic proximity, Oakland and San Ramon, again, not really close, but sort of northern part of the Bay Area versus southern part of the Bay Area.
Yeah, so, that might be a meeting that you could shift, or if you wanted to, it's up to the commission where they want to have their meetings.
I was just wondering, from a Q2 perspective,
I
raised it as an issue. Again, it's been raised in public comment.
Well, let's just assume we're going to do that and make that a recommendation.
Well, I'd suggest that, but if others agree with that or don't agree with that.
I agree with that, sure.
Okay.
There's also public comment saying that we should have at least one or two more meetings in the three most populated cities, LA, San Diego, and San Jose. LA, San Diego, and San Jose. So is there an opportunity to do that?
We had a lot of TBDs in there, I noticed.
I'm sorry?
We had a lot of TBDs in there, so
Yes, we do.
we fill it in there.
So I'm sorry, are you asking, so we have one in San Diego on this calendar. Are you thinking of having an additional one in San Diego?
And LA.
In LA, we have, we have 5 in the LA area, the greater LA area.
Oh, okay.
So those are all Region 4 is LA County area.
All right, well, one more in San Diego.
Commissioner Parvenu has it.
Commissioner Parvenu.
While we're on the subject of LA, looking at the last week of April, just as a suggestion to staff in Q2, it works better for city public facilities. And I've been in discussion with both the city manager's office at Los Angeles, my place of employment, as well as Culver City, my place of residence. And with both of their city hall, civic center facilities, it works better to have meetings there on Thursdays.
Thursdays?
Yes, because they have council hearings, they have committee meetings, they have other activities in those sites that would conflict with our schedule, be it a daytime business meeting as well as a nighttime public input hearing. if that is the case. So Thursdays work better for that. So I would suggest moving LA to the 28th for LA City. And perhaps if we can get the California Endowment Facility or some other facility on Saturday in LA, that would work. But City Hall would not work in the case of LA. If there's another private venue, perhaps that would be a consideration. Also with Culver City, too. Culver City is not in session on Thursdays. So I want to keep that in mind in your future planning. But I have no problems with that date and accepting this calendar and concept. I do have a question, though, why Whittier stands out. Nothing against Whittier, but we have a commissioner here. San Gabriel is another option that I don't know how Whittier
Yeah, I'm going to
stands
let
out.
Mr. Claypool answer
Could you
that because
please
I just
respond?
followed what
Yes.
was there. So please.
Come on. Oh, no.
No offense to anyone from Whittier. I love Whittier. I shop there. I have friends there.
We were looking, as we were looking at the difference, and this was staff again, and as we were looking at the Inland Empire and we were looking at LA and we were looking at areas that kind of came in, we were trying to just be geographic with it. There's no, although Whittier is a very nice place, there was no special meaning to Whittier other than it represented an eastern LA venue. So it's certainly an area that could be changed. The only two that were specifically recommended to us as being absolutely necessary in the LA area, and although it was the Pico area, and then the second one, which I realize is not in the LA area, but seems awfully close to those of us who are in Northern California, was Oxnard and Santa Paula. So I said not in the LA area, but seemed awfully close visually to us. So those were the two that we got suggestions on. The rest of them were just geographic.
Okay. The reason I raise this is because Commissioner Filkins, wherever she's in Norco, we have Culver City, another commissioner, Culver City, and I know that Commissioner, we have, yes, we have Commissioner Raya and San Gabriel, and I know that was an issue 10 years ago with Common Cause and that issue with the lines there in San Gabriel, so that's what my recommendation would be.
Certainly, and again, with the exception of those two locations, all the rest of them were picked mainly on growth and just what Rob and Janice and I thought looked like an adequate geographic dispersion.
Any other commissioners would like to make a recommendation? Okay, Commissioner Raya?
Okay. When I suggested San Gabriel, a location for San Gabriel, when it was originally on the calendar in July, that facility undergoes maintenance in July. So actually, if you wanted to move us up to the end of April, that might be a possibility for that facility. I don't know. That's
Commissioner Baraba.
By adding a San Jose visit and Salinas, both of those are quite away from the coast, and towns like Watsonville and areas like that. And I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be, if you're going to do San Jose, instead of going to Salinas, we went to Watsonville. Although it's not in Monterey County, it certainly is right next to it. And it would give you the opportunity for people along the central coast to attend that meeting a lot easier.
We actually received a comment from individuals and area groups that Salinas, you needed to keep it in Salinas and Monterey within the county, that as suitable an area as Watsonville is, that Salinas and Monterey were the areas that these meetings should be held in. That was another, those were directed by comment.
Then I think maybe one of the TBDs might move to the coast.
I think these are great points in terms of, I think every one of us has some insight and some opinions, but this is where we have to, as a commission, speaks to Mr. Claypool's point about kind of funneling all this very useful and very important data that will help staff and our consultants, but we have to kind of funnel it in a way so that it can be taken into consideration and then reviewed by the full commission. But having said that, do we feel comfortable at this point as advisory committee members to go forward with what we've suggested, to recommend those changes for the beginning of April and then for staff and Q2 to work together on providing a master calendar for us for tomorrow for the full commission. And then we will adopt in principle the remainder of the calendar with those revisions as needed along the way. Are we comfortable with that topic? Okay.
Taking into consideration what you all heard.
Okay. I think I'll move on to the next issue. We're going to keep this going because we've got a lot of important things to talk about. Would be the actual structure of the input hearings, and that falls under, I think I included in that would be agenda item number 3, the toolkit and translations, and agenda item number 7, a discussion and recommendations regarding the technical structure and needs for input hearings. So in other words, I think that we need to make a recommendation to the full commission. Let me just back up for a second, and maybe Gil and Commissioner Ontine and Commissioner Inchetta could speak to this. We had the conversation with Q2. Thank you, Ms. Henderson. We had a discussion with Q2 about the realization that we need to have a structure and a methodology. We as a commission need to understand and approve the methodology and the structure for the input hearings, both in terms of how will the public be providing information to us, what will we be giving to the public in terms of what, so they know how to present information to us. We've been waiting a long time for technical consultants to add to the toolkit. There's been the discussion about an educational component at the beginning of each meeting, a brief one. So there's a lot of these elements, and I'd like to see how the the advisory committee would like to approach this, because we could spend a very long time getting bogged down in these details. I think this is a good point where we'd like to agree on a set of principles or protocol that we could then direct staff and Q2 to work together. And we will have the opportunity to review whatever they put together one more time before input hearings start, and then we could finalize that. But if anyone has some specific questions or suggestions about that, this would be a good opportunity to bring those forward.
And before we go forward on that, could I briefly take a moment? I think we have a public speaker, right?
I do.
Okay,
Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm speaking out of turn. Deborah Howard, working with the California Chamber of Commerce and other statewide business associations. I just want to raise a concern about the 2 outreach hearings that are being scheduled in Redding, in Shasta County, and Yuba City in Butte County. And my reasoning for that is that that's not a populous center of the state. I understand Yuba County is a Section 5 county, but when you look at current and past congressional, assembly, and Senate seats, those counties are not divided. Butte County is currently divided in the congressional mapping, and I think we can all attribute that to the gerrymandering that went on to make incumbents safe. So we were looking, the last mappers were drawing districts to find population to make those safe districts. Since that won't be a criteria for you, I think it's pretty safe to assume, drawing on the criteria that's put forth in both Prop 11 and 20, those are not going to be controversial communities where you're going to have people saying, I want to be here, I want to be there. And I raise it because your resources of time and money are so scarce. And the intensity of those conversations in other areas where Los Angeles County, Orange County, Riverside County, San Bernardino, San Diego County, all abut each other, is going to be hugely intense. And I think at the end of the day, you're going to think that these hours spent traveling and communicating in an area that truly isn't going to be controversial could have been better spent. And I know you've heard public testimony on this back and forth. As you're closing in on it and you really see the narrowness of the window you have to accomplish your work, I just want to raise it one more time. So if I spoke out of turn, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so we'll continue with our discussion on the format. I'll just open it up and see where we go. Otherwise, I'm going to ask staff to give us an idea of what that actual format would look like. Janice, I think we discussed that, right?
Yes.
Tell us how you, the staff, would set up a typical meeting.
How staff would, I'm sorry, I can barely hear you.
How would staff typically set up this meeting?
Okay, so after Lon and I have found the venue based on all the criteria that you've given us, and we've secured it, and we've got a point person there, and we've worked out the details, then half of the staff team will arrive quite early in the day to make sure that all of the details are taken care of. And the way we've got it figured out is that we've got a person at the door so that when the crowd comes in, questions are answered, directions are given, and then the question that we're going to be asking is, if you want to make a presentation, you'll need to get a number. And that person will become speaker number 1, speaker number 2, whatever. Then there will be a table near the lectern microphone, and they will get their number there, and then they'll go take a seat. And when their number is called, they'll come back and hand the number back to staff. That's how we're going to keep track of the numbers, and then approach the lectern and make their presentation. If they have handouts, maps, a letter, their statement, whatever, we will gather it, and we'll have an Excel spreadsheet, and we're going to be cataloging it and tabbing it so that we will cross-reference what's on our Excel spreadsheet to the actual document. And then we will gather all of that information and make sure that Q2 has that in an organized fashion.
Okay, so where does the toolkit come in, Rob? Are we going to be handing someone that comes up to the mic and says, I want to present something? Are we going to give them the toolkit that says it's in Spanish, it's in English, it's going to say you need to provide this data, that data? I mean, what exactly is in the toolkit?
Well, the toolkit that the advisory committee approved, and we did not have the ability last time, as you remember, Commissioner, we had to cut it short, so we couldn't present it to the full commission. So hopefully we'll be able to do that, to present the toolkit to the full commission. That toolkit will go online. Part of the public relations outreach campaign will be talking about the toolkit, so that's a helpful resource to be used in advance, that people can have that toolkit because it helps them put together the materials and the tips on gathering census census data in their area and talking about their community, those sorts of things. So that would be online, and also would be available in a printed form at redistricting centers and given to partners, and that's it. Now, of course, we can have copies of that at the meeting as well.
So in the tool, Dan.
Well, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit, because earlier when we had spoken, Janice had referenced 3 people. There actually be 4 people there. And our thought was that we would have a table at the back of one of these venues while the commission is at the front, and that table would be stocked with our toolkit, and one of us could be there to assist, also with a translator if necessary, to help individuals put their information in the format that we're recommending, or as close as we can to recommending for Q2, and the staff that will be at the front.
So Q2 is going to work with you in putting those questions together?
In the toolkit?
Yeah.
Yes, we can work with Q2 on the toolkit. We have the draft that was been presented so far, and then we can reach out in the next few days as to get their help on that.
Because I would imagine there has to be a core set of questions that has to be in that toolkit, so that Q2 can then take that information, easily categorize that.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Correct.
I'm assuming something's got to have some one-on-one connection.
Right. The categorization, I think, is envisioned by our staff. We'll be the ones that will not necessarily categorize it into the program that they're using, but we'll be the ones taking the information and keeping track of it. The line drawer will be working with the commissioners. And then when it's over, we'll transfer the categorized information to Q2 so that they can then enter it into whatever program they use to keep track of the information.
And I think it's helpful to mention, we, kind of going on what Gil said, is a part of our intention was initially having a consultation with Q2 was to try and, we would have loved to have had something you could review in terms of the technical component, or an actual, the form that we will be distributing to the public in terms of how they submit the response. But the reality was, Q2 is just was awarded the contract, awarded the contract 4 days before this. This actually not in place yet. And so they were not in a position to give us the level of detail other than a general discussion. They gave us some idea of the framing of how they, I'm not saying frame, of how they plan to provide that framework. And they're very knowledgeable. I think we can all agree on that. And so what we realized is that in order to move this process forward, we have to be able to recommend to the full commission that we give the authority for staff and our consultants to work together to bring something that we can actually review for the next meeting based on things that we would like to review, such as a toolkit, such as the worksheet that they'll provide to the public, guidelines for the commissioner's role in these meetings. What will we be responsible for doing? So if we agree as advisory committee that these are some of the topics that we would like them to address for us and bring that report back to us for a full vote, then we can move on, we can make that recommendation, and then, as unfortunately, we won't be able to consider it in full until then.
So I would agree with that, but I think we should, and we can do it here or it can come on the full, I think we should try to prioritize, given the calendar and the shortness of time, since our, because we may not be approving things basically until 2 days before the Reading hearing. That, for example, the toolkit, as long as it's more general information, that could probably be released in advance versus something has a lot more detail and guidelines in it. So I think we could start to sort of articulate, at least when we present something to the full commission, that we expect there's certain things have much more serious timing deadlines than others. But just so we can differentiate a couple things, because I think we're talking about a couple different processes and products.
Mm-hmm. Rob. Yes, the toolkit has been vetted by the Outreach Advisory Committee and the Public Information Advisory Committee. And I think that given that we can present this to the full commission tomorrow, that it is a good starting document, that there might be things that we want to add to it, but there are enough tools there that like the commissioner said, we don't want to wait till 2 days before Reading. We need to get information out. We need to get it out right away. So I think it's a good document. We worked very hard on it. We worked with the Redistricting California organization and the outreach partners, and and I think we got good comments when we had it before the 2 advisory committees, and I think it's something that we can get out.
Okay, Commissioner Baraba.
Yeah, one of the things I learned today was that from Ms. Henderson's position is that the communities of interest are going to have to come from the communities, and she had some very specific direction as to how they should be described. Now, is that in the current toolkit, or is that something that's going to have to be added?
There is a section in the current toolkit. It has the official definition as it appears in the Constitution on what a community of interest is, and then there's helpful information about how do I talk about my community. Okay. And so we can add to that as we go along. It's a pretty good starting point.
Because she was very specific on the kind of things we would want to have, like even whether the boundaries are there. And so, but if that's going to be the main thrust of those meetings, that's the only place we're going to hear about communities of interest. We really should be prepared. We should really prepare the community to have a really clear articulation of what they mean by that, because that's the only place we're going to run into this.
Correct.
And I thought we might be doing some of that ourselves, but it sounded like the way she interpreted the role is that they were going to come from the community.
Well, that's where I've been thinking through the timeline, and I've had some exchange with Commissioner Ontine and separately on the technical committee with Commissioner Giulio, is that it may be, and I think there's probably a little more fleshing out in the toolkit that we need to do on this, but I think, because the toolkit provides a lot of things regarding how does the commission work, there's a lot of more general information.
Correct.
And I think that's fine. And again, I'm not sure how, this is sort of a balance between the level of detail that has to go in the toolkit versus something that really, and I think this is your point, which is we actually need to hash through a lot of stuff, important stuff, which I think may not have, because of timing, may not be able to get into the toolkit per se, but I think we'll have to publish them on the web or something. For example, here's a community of interest specific toolkit or something where we've actually had a chance to talk about it more. But I see the initial toolkit as something that's, again, in my mind, somewhat more general, gets you thinking about what you have to worry about, gives you a sense of what the hearings are all about. But if you want more specifics, if you're going to come testify pretty soon, look on the web. We'll be posting very soon. And that kind of other stuff that'll be on the web was something we could actually develop and look at.
But also, I would
Among the
think,
commission.
from a publicity point of view, there'd be some really good news releases we get out to the local papers. And I think they would want to be as specific as they could.
Right. Dan?
And again, I think ideally, we would just get all that stuff done in the next 2 weeks, but I think we're just not going to get it.
Well, and truly, then you're speaking to the heart of the matter, and the faster that we can approve a firm calendar all the way out, the more we can reach out into these communities ahead of us getting there.
Commissioner
And
Brown.
it seems to me we ought to, in these initial meetings that we have, there ought to be some mechanism to get feedback as to how difficult it either was or wasn't to comply with our requests, so we can learn how to do it better as we go down the process.
Like an assessment tool.
Yeah.
I mean, an assessment of our process, yeah.
Yeah.
By the participants.
Commissioner Yao. Yeah, it's an excellent idea.
I'm sorry, I've been in and out, so this may be something that you have discussed already. First of all, are we still basically looking at 3-minute, 5-minute per input from the public on these toolkits, on these input sessions?
I don't think we've changed that rule, although I think we have to play that by ear depending on the attendance and the magnitude of the audience.
Okay, just a matter of practicality, assuming 5 minutes per speaker, you're limited to maybe a dozen or so inputs in an hour and 3-hour meeting. 35, 36, that's assuming that you're going to go straight through and follow the agenda. And do we have a plan in the event that we have a number larger than 35, 36, and
We stay till midnight.
do we have other options in surviving a single meeting in a single area?
I think, to be fair, the public is our partner in this process. So, if it has to take us extended hours to hear all of the input, we have to consider being there for a very long evening or day.
But, related to that point, and we had some discussion in our call with Q2 the other day about the statewide maps and how to deal with statewide maps. And the balance was such, I think we sort of agreed that you could shorten the oral presentation as long as you got sufficient detail in a written presentation. Now, for general members of the public, I'm not sure if that works for general members of the public. Maybe it's better just have them speak for a couple minutes and that's sufficient. But I think the more people and the more data you have, if you shift more to written versus purely oral, maybe that'll be helpful. 'Cause at least we'll get them. Give us a written map. Give us just spend a page or so describing what you're doing. You might only have a minute to actually talk about it, but at least you'll get the stuff to us, and we'll have something to look at.
And if they're organized presentations by one group, and there's 5 or 6 people want to talk, and they're all talking about the same thing, I think maybe staff can filter that and make it a rule that, if it's an organized presentation, maybe one person represents all of them.
Could I make a recommendation that I think there's two tracks. One is, it'd be nice for us to have a report then, or something to be able to look at the next time as a full commission, that one would take in the considerations of, as Commissioner Antai and Ms. Sargis had mentioned, is all the elements of the logistics of the meeting, so we can visualize how this will take place. And the other element is a report from Q2 detailing how long each person's going to get a presentation, again, what that form will be for the toolkit, what the form will be for the feedback for the public, so we could actually have something to review, because I think these are all really important issues that we're bringing, but we're talking in an abstract at this point. So, and with that, is it possible to recommend that, I promise Commissioner Blanco we'd keep this going, because we're out of here at 5 o'clock. Is it possible at this point to make a recommendation that we would we'd give the ability for staff in Q2 to bring that back to us?
Do you have enough sense from us
Yeah,
to?
okay.
put something
Because
together.
there's nothing we can really, we can't vote on anything in the absence of it. We could talk forever, but knowing that that's where the status is at this point. Commissioner Columbus-Malloy?
Yeah, so let me ask a clarification. In principle, I think that's what we need to do, what we should do. But that would mean that we would be reviewing the materials on April 7th and 8th, which is 24 to 48 hours before our first hearing. So just thinking of the public trying to figure out how to best engage with us, it feels like we're not giving them enough time to also absorb, and also with our consultants, that if there are any significant changes to the materials, will they really be able to turn them around in time?
Well, we're caught in a hard place. Maybe Mr. Claypool could speak to this, because I think this is where the issue of a lead person in multiple different outreach, technical or others, will play a key role in this, is if we are, unfortunately, we are under a time constraint. It's not a pretty option. Either we're not going to have this decided on in time, or we'll be able to decide upon it, but it wouldn't be with the level of scrutiny we would like. But as a kind of a middle ground is, if there is a lead that's determined, and not, I hope that we could structure in a way that it's just not one person, that there's an ability, without violating Bagley Keene, is to provide enough input from the different advisory committees that are impacted. I think there's something with outreach, there's something with technical, there's something with legal, that they would have an opportunity to be the ones to push it along to a process, push it along far enough in the process that by the time we get there as a full commission for review, that we would have that a lot of those issues that we've taken in consideration, as well as public comments, will be able to be incorporated. That there's some oversight by commissioners. It would mean that the full commission would have to put their trust into a smaller number of commissioners to be able to do that. But as long as the full commission is willing to do that, I think, Mr. Claypool, that would allow you the flexibility to bring back to the full commission something for a review.
And certainly, and that's hand in hand with what we were proposing anyway with the lead position. We can talk with Kurt about it, but I would think that at a minimum we have our chair and our vice chair in Commissioners Ontai and Aguirre, and then we could also go to both the heads of the two outreach and technical committees, or however you chose to do it. But that's hand in hand with what we'd like to do. We could start this in this next week, because we need to start turning this around very quickly to you. So I would think that we could work with Q2. We have meetings with Q2's planned for Wednesday and Thursday. We can combine some of this up and start turning it around.
Well, at this point, though, do you have enough direction or sense of direction from this commission, this advisory committee, for you to do that?
Let me repeat what I understand that you would like us to do. You want us to give you, to the best of our ability at this point, an end-to-end scenario for how these business meetings are going to occur, how long that we should, or these input hearings, I'm sorry, how long a time would be a recommended amount of time for each speaker to speak, a policy on groups, and how a group would be handled within the input hearing, and what types of materials we need to have there at a minimum to start this process, and then have some type of way to evaluate at least our first 3 to 5 meetings from the public, so that we can refine the process and have it really running well by the time we hit the end of the month. Is that correct?
I think so. Do you all feel the same way? Including the hours, day and evening.
Okay.
That's a hard one.
And to
including the hours.
Commissioner DeGiulio's comment about the lead person on the advisory committee, I think our council indicated that you'd be in a position to ask at least one other member to comment on it. And if you could just share that around the other members, that would, I think, satisfy most of anybody's concerns.
Well, considering we only have 4 on each, if you have the lead plus 1, that's pretty many. Sorry, Commissioner, yeah.
Does it make sense, this question for staff, does it make sense to have some kind of reservation system for speakers? The way I'm looking at it is, all of a sudden you got 60 inputs, or 60 people that are interested in speaking, then maybe we can start the meeting earlier than let's say 6 o'clock for some of those people to get in and address us. I know we can leave the tail end open, but there are only so many hours, past 9 p.m. Number one. Number two is if they don't know when they're going to be able to address the commission, that basically imply that most of them would have to stay through the entire 3, 4, 5, 6 hours that we're meeting, and that may be an extreme hardship on the residents that are interested in talking to us. So, have you considered going to some kind of reservation system similar to what we did with the group that presented to us one Saturday?
To address the first question, I don't know that we want, if we publish an hour we're starting, I don't know that we want to get caught up in that quandary of saying, well, we've taken reservations and now we're going to start at an early hour. I think it just really confuses the public the same way. The second thing, the card system that we're proposing to use would have us giving a person, we're stealing quite a bit from CCP, and we appreciate their great thought on this. But one of the things we have on order right now is a clock so that people will be able to see how much time they have left to automatically to speak. The second thing is a number counter similar to the deli. And so if you have number 33 and you know that you get 5 minutes, everybody gets 5 minutes apiece, you know that you're 150 minutes out unless somebody leaves. So they'll have to factor that in. But that's the thought, that in order to give people some type of ability to not have to stay there in that room that whole time, that they can run the math, and that's about as far as we've gone.
Now, one you might want to consider is to say that we're going to limit it to X number of speakers, and if you want to make sure you speak, get there early and get your card.
The one thing.
It's a problem. I mean, if 70 people show up, you're going to have 35.
Well,
really upset with
it was similar to our conversation about having people live interact with us and us reading the comments. You suddenly find yourself in a real quandary about who you cut off and who you don't. And I think the one thing that we've heard, the one thing I heard from Doug Johnson and Rose Institute, and the one thing I've heard from Karen McDonald, where they're absolutely consistent, is you open the doors and you close them when nobody else wants to speak anymore.
All right.
And with
I don't mind staying, but if we've been talking about poor people who come here early and then they have to wait 5 hours before they speak. There's one way of addressing that is just to limit the number of people who can speak.
Well, with that, Mr. Claypool set up the next issue beautifully for us, which is we need to set some type of policy on the options for public input, and this came up specifically and related to electronically submitted input. So I think Commissioner Ontai will talk about that. That's under also, what is that? Agenda item number 6, guidelines for public input.
So during these public input hearings, we're going to have people phoning in, calling in, electronically sending us messages. Have you given some thought on how we're going to collect that, categorize it, record it? Is this something we need to work out with Q2 or 3?
I'll tell you, I'll give you a brief vignette. We have 3 options, but 2 days ago we had callers from, I believe, from Indiana and a caller from North Carolina. People are interested in what you're doing. If we have option number 1, where we take public input on the computer and we're trying to read it in, we have no control whatsoever over where they're coming from or what the individuals are saying. So you suddenly find yourself with having to say, will you take a comment from a Marysville or from a Susansville resident wanting to talk about their relationship with Reading while you're at Fresno, because Fresno is very much a regional meeting. And so now you start saying who are you cutting off and who you aren't. That's the first issue. As we start picking up steam with this concept, I would imagine that we're going to get more and more people wanting to comment, particularly if you set a policy where you will read them at your public meetings. So you have that option to read them at the public meetings, but you may find yourself in a position where you're reading well into the night, or you're selectively cutting somebody out who sent you an email. Your second option would be to read them all at the end and have your staff back in Sacramento sorting through them and saying, these appear to be those that are germane, as we're getting them in here, to that region. But you're still back to that picture of somebody saying, well, mine was germane just because I was talking about Stockton when you were in Fresno, that they were all in the Central Valley. The third thing we can do is what we've done before, and that is to concentrate on that regional meeting, give those people in that area that you're talking to the full focus of your attention, and simply taking the public comment that comes in, and during that day and that period, having staff say, this is the total amalgam of traffic that came in, these are the ones that submitted information that are germane to Fresno, and this should go with that group that's cataloged for that conversation, and just say you can read your comments. I know that that members of the organized groups have always been very keen on the concept of having interaction from further out, and it really came about with the Bureau of State Audits meetings, where we would have the Crest Theater rented out, and we would only have 2 people in 1,800 seats. And so they would say, you should be taking this public comment. In that venue, that was a perfectly valid comment. In this particular venue, I think that you risk having it become unmanageable very quickly and losing the grasp of the regional meeting. So we would suggest clearly that you stick with taking the public comment that you've got on hand and just amalgamating the public comment that's coming in from the internet or from telephone calls and cataloging it with that information that you'll have available to you when you draw the lines.
That's option 3.
That would be option 3.
Comments? Oh, Commissioner Aguirre?
Yeah, let me, is it on? Is it on?
It is.
Let me see if I understand that correctly. So there may be some situations where we have so much written public comment that by reading it, it might take hours just to go through it, right?
Electronically submitted.
Not in writing. Because we are going to have some individuals that are going to walk in the door and say, I have this public comment, it's in writing, but it belongs to over there. So my question is, we can accept that information just the way that we accept internet, web-based information, catalog it, make it a part of the record, and then that's it, right?
Yeah, sure, that would be it.
And then staff would be going through that, looking to see what's relevant to each particular region or meeting, and cataloging that accordingly so that at the end of the day, at the end of the process, you'd have a file for each region based on each meeting, all of the information that went in for us to consider with our consultants and really getting the job done. Is that fair?
That's fair. And I think that what I would say is anything accepted at the meeting stays with the meeting, even if it's a comment about how I live. I was just passing through and I live in Susansville and I want to talk about Reading, would stay with that Fresno meeting because that was in the region it was accepted at. Having said that, for the information that's coming in on the internet, I think that has to become a staff function of separating that out from the general comments. All of it's going to post up, first of all. It'll all be available, but then separating out that portion that appears to be germane to that region and making sure it catalogs with it.
Okay.
I would prefer option 3. I don't know about the rest of you. Comments?
I think just to kind of address, I think this was an issue for some of the community groups because they felt there may be times when we're in areas where in that same region there are people that are very remote, that are very far away, and it will be hard for them. So there was even a suggestion you could have a Skype option where you could interact live. But again, this is a logistics because you can't prove where that person is, and the amount of staff resources would be incredible. So it was suggested that we could, if we'd like to consider it, I don't think this is a discussion for now, but to address the issues of the public, we could actually offer a webinar at some point so that we could specifically have have an input hearing that's dedicated to people who would like to submit electronically because they were just not able to, because of geographic isolation or other reasons, weren't able to. But I think that would be, that's a discussion for later, but that does address, that does give another option for electronically submitted input. But I do agree, I think the third option is really the only one that's reasonable for our staff in terms of, and giving due diligence to the people that show up. They've made an effort to be there, and I think they should have the opportunity to do that. And everyone else will have their comments considered, but just not in a publicly read fashion.
And these hearings are coming up in about 2 weeks, so you kind of need some direction.
Yes.
If I could just make one more comment about due diligence to the people that show up. Just in the area of the decorum of the commission toward the public, to me, it's appropriate to have computers up in front of us when we're in business meetings, but at these meetings with the community, we need to put that away because we really have to listen carefully and trust that our staff will be taking those notes that are going to be presented. The information is going to be presented for us for discussion for a later time. But we just need to be very respectful of community, listen closely and carefully, and entrust our staff to help taking the record.
So, according to Corinne, Ms. McDonald, and Ms. Henderson, commissioners will be asked to engage in the public when they're making these presentations, asking them questions of how did you arrive at this map, what were the reasons, and you're going to be recording all of that.
Well, first of all, yes, we'll be recording it simply because everything you're going to be doing is going to be live streamed. So we'll always have a live streamed record of all public testimony. What our main function there will be to be taking the written submissions and the maps and so forth and making sure they're being cataloged to the individual and to the location or both that we received it. Insofar as the comments go, we'll have 2 people up there, and we're going to try to capture the comments as closely as we can. Hopefully, the line drawer at the same time, and we have to certainly confirm this with Karin, but hopefully the line drawer will also be involved with part of this, part of taking in what each individual has to say, so that we have 2 sets of ears. But no matter what we do, we will always have the live video stream record to go back to if we need clarification on what was said. So for us, the major focus is not losing anything presented, because we'll have a backup on spoken.
So for example, if I'm asking someone in the audience how they arrived at that map and what were the reasons, and we're getting a slew of electronic messages coming in regarding that issue, again, option 3, if it's relevant, you're recording that. And you're going to make some report to us on it.
Right. Under option 3, we could have staff, and we hadn't even thought about the reporting to you as much as we knew that we needed to capture. But under the third option, who's ever working in Sacramento and making these differentiations can present you with a report saying, here are the 35 emails or the 55 emails, however much it is, that came in last night that appear to speak directly to Fresno and to the presentations that were being given. And so they need to be cataloged with that meeting and given to Karin's group so that they can take this under consideration. That was about as far as we had thought it out. But certainly, present it to commission and to Karin could be done at the same time, because it's got to get to Karin's group.
Other comments? Commissioner Yao.
One more question on the public input. Undoubtedly, we'll probably be asked questions during the public input session. Is there any way that we can answer those questions offline as compared to taking time from the entire panel in addressing the questions they're asked? Not answering is not the right action to take, or delay answering may be one solution.
I think this is a question for our chief counsel.
Yeah.
Because I'm not entirely certain what's agendized and what's non-agendized. I've heard that you can ask for clarification, but I don't know personally what you can really ask someone who's presenting you with something. I had been under the impression that that was going to be the function of Karen's staff to intercede on your behalf, to ask the questions that kind of nailed down what the testimony was supposed to be for.
Yeah, this is what, again, just an initial conversation with Q2 was that because of the restrictions placed on commissioners, but still wanting to do due diligence to the public comment, if it wasn't clear, if it wasn't enough information that we would need in order to be able to include it in the public comments, that the interaction would happen with the technical consultant because they have the flexibility to engage the public to get the information that's needed. So we would want to make sure we would be able to do that. Does that answer your
If
question?
the public asked the commission a question on the definition of community of interest, okay? So, question of that nature, it just seems like it'll be difficult for us to ignore it or not answer it or do anything else.
I think the technical consultant would probably be able to
Okay.
do that. I would be my guess. I think that's, again, hopefully that will be in a report that they would provide to us so we could review that, because I think that is an important point to be able to address the questions from the public.
If it's a question like that that's in your literature, I think that it's something that a staff member there, Janice or myself will be there, that we could read, we could bring it forward and say, the literature says a community of interest is, and just read it and hand it back.
So the process is to take it offline so that the entire commission doesn't have to address it in real time. Is that the recommendation?
Well, my recommendation is that we ask our chief counsel and Marion Johnston how far you can go, and then that would be our recommendation. Because I don't want to take away something from you that just by making a blanket recommendation, because I don't know.
Yeah, my concern is with time and or the lack of time.
Certainly.
Other commissioners? None? Okay, so we're recommending that you go ahead and put this show on the road and give us a format, and then let us know.
I'm sorry, I want to clarify, so I'm keeping track of these recommendations for the full commission. As I understand it, is that we're recommending that we adopt a policy for our input hearings, that we will accept all electronic submissions, public input, but that they will be then sent to our technical team for consideration of that region. As much as possible, they will not be read in public, and they will not be, we won't have any Skype options, for lack of a better word. So as much as it's as much what it's not as what it is, so.
Right. The only things that will be read in public will be read by the person presenting them to you.
I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So is there anything else that you need from us, or a sense from us, for you to go forward?
Only because we're not going to actually vote on having the lead position that we had talked about until next week, that these two committees designate a person that we can work with besides yourself and Commissioner Aguirre, who will be the chair and vice chair, that we can also call so that we can just get a sense of whether we're going in the right direction for this commission. So if you could make a decision as to who those the individuals be from the two committees, that would be most helpful.
Okay, well, it is true, next week I'll be chair and Commissioner Aguirre will be vice chair, so you're saying we need to designate somebody else in the outreach committee.
Right, yeah, so one from the outreach and possibly one from the technical, so that we could expand, because I think that's the way we've been operating so far. We're always operating with somebody out of the committees and then making sure it all runs through the chair and the vice chair, so that would give us 4 individuals who are taking, who are able to review on behalf of the commission.
Sure. So on the outreach,
Can I maybe make a suggestion, Commissioner Antai, that we do hold off on that, only because there's 2 more items, I think, that because of the shortened time period, would that be okay, Mr. Claypool?
Certainly.
That that staff has to have our recommendations, but which are, let me just throw them out there, one is Actually, I take it back. There's really only one, is because, as I understood it, in clarification, Mr. Claypool, was the public access to redistricting update, which was the information we had to submit to the legislature for the review as options for them to fund. I now understand that things like the proposal that we received from San Diego, the supplementation of this redistricting assistance sites, those are all the options we were going to present to the legislature, but we don't have a complete list, so we actually don't have to make an action item on that now.
That is correct. That is correct that we don't have a complete list. We do, however, we have, however, received a proposal from a couple of organizations, including ESRI, for their presentation to the, or what they would provide to the commission through the legislature. And one of the persons, Mr. Lafferty, who had actually presented it to us is actually in the public. If there were any questions about how ESRI would work, it would be an opportunity to discuss that. But it wouldn't be part of our presentation for next week. It's just, it'd just be something that you could discuss if we needed to.
Could I suggest that, since it's not actually, as I was on clarification, it's not actually going to be an action item, can we hold off on that? Might be a good opportunity to talk to him, but should we go through the action items for we have to talk about the inline process review, IFB, because if we do that, there is a time constraint for us. And then we also need to have the discussion about the lead role. Could
Certainly.
I just want to make sure we have enough time the inline process review could be a intensive discussion, not to say intensive, but I think there's a lot of issues around it, so maybe if we give ourselves enough time, we could come back and hear from ESRI, if that's all right. I think this is under item number 8. Just check my Roman numerals. Okay, V is the 5, the X is... Okay. Actually, let me just turn this over to Mr. Claypool. You could probably give us a more brief. As I understand it, this was an action item that we had discussed about having an inline process review invitation for bid. One of the options we were thinking about was just basically having a pool of individuals who we could then call on later as needed for review. But what we're under is a timeline, because we would need to have some type of, staff would need to present to us a draft IFB for the advisory committee and full commission at the next meeting, so that we could review, revise, and adopt that for then it could be released shortly after our next meeting, and then the proposals would be available for review at the CRC, that our business meeting at the end of April or beginning of May. So that's the time frame why we're looking at it now. So with that, I'll let Mr. Claypool describe the details.
Just a question. So, working off the timeline, do we want an inline, if we're going to go with this, is this at the first draft stage, or is it somewhere later down the line?
Right now?
I'm just wondering what the timing is, because if you're saying you want inline review at the first draft stage, that's really much sooner than the second draft or the next final version. So I'm just kind of wondering where we see. Sure. I'm not a big supporter of it personally, but if you really want it, where do you want it to start? Because if it's May, then you got to move fast or faster.
I think that's part of our discussion.
Right. So I know that there's a lot of do we or don't we on this issue, and it has some positive aspects, particularly from public perception, and has some negative aspects, because you end up with the possibility of having someone review the drafts that you've completed, that your line drawers completed, and give you possibly a very different view of what they believe should have been done. Having said that, it was suggested as a possible item or as a possible option to provide the type of balance in lieu of 2 line drawers, when people were talking about that, and so we said, well, if we had an inline review process, that would give people some assurance that there was a second set of eyes. Now, having said that, it can be anywhere you want it to be. Presumably, it could start with the first drafts and go all the way through them. It could be someone who came in on the last drafts and gave it. But so that's a decision has to be made by this commission. However, we got the IFB for the inline, or for the technical consultant for the line drawing done in 1 month. We have 2 months between now, roughly 2 months between now and the first draft maps in June. So now's really the time to do this and bring somebody aboard. The contract can be written with as needed. You bid knowing that you might not get anything or you might get it all. And so, but we would like to start earlier so that we're just not as compressed like we were with the technical consultant.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Anchetta?
I see some need for some outside eyes to look at it. I'm not so concerned about balance in that sense, but that's my position. But for those who really feel it's more strongly about it, I'd like to hear what they have to say in terms of the inline.
Commissioner Yao.
Whoever is going to be doing this in-process review is really part of should consider themselves to be part of the team to get the product done well, okay? So the way I envision is before the first draft is done, some reviewer would take a look at the process and the data and the outcome and make positive recommendations, things that can make the product better, okay? If somebody is coming in at that point saying this is all wrong, you shouldn't be doing that way, that's not at all what's defined as an in-process review. Basically, with these positive recommendations, then Q2 would accept those as input, and then they're being held responsible for the outcome. So they have to make the decision as to how to react to these additional comments, okay, as part of the process. They can, I'm not recommending it, they can basically go as far as totally listen to them and make changes to totally ignoring it. I mean, this is, it absolutely does not tie Q2's hand in terms of how they do their work. So I kind of envision that a review would take place prior to the first draft and also prior to the second draft, okay? And then that will be it. Those will be the, by the time you get to the final, it's really way too late, and the in-process is really not appropriate anymore. So I kind of like to think that as long as some kind of contracting vehicle is in place and a pool of money is set aside so that we can basically task an individual or a very small team to jump in for that day or two or whatever amount of time it needs to come up with a set of positive recommendations. That to me is the in-process review.
Commissioner Baraba.
I apologize for not being here. I was doing my other duties. This is on an as-needed basis. This is not, I mean, if we don't see a need to bring a person in, we don't bring them in. Did I understand that correctly?
No.
This, no, well, this, and I want to really emphasize, this can be structured any way you want to structure it. You can say it's a required function, it's an as-needed function, but we need to select the individual as you wish to have it performed, if you wish to have it performed now. We can't wait until we're in the process.
Yeah, my point is that if we've given direction and the Q2 meets those directions and we don't see any problems, I'm questioning why we need to have somebody else come and look at it.
Commissioner Raya?
My question is that I don't really understand what triggers, even if we just have somebody, as I think Peter's suggesting, you know, we just have the money and the position ready to roll when we need it, and I don't understand how we decide when we need it. What triggers that? I'm sorry, because I don't work in I've never worked in a business where I've had to deal with this kind of review that those of you in manufacturing have, so I don't know how it operates.
I don't think it's a manufacturing problem, but an example could be is that we give direction and it comes back and we have a disagreement with how they implemented it, and they have a really good reason for not having done what we asked, and we're at a quandary. at that point, there may be some value in bringing a third point of view in to help us resolve it. But that's what I saw as the value of this. But if we give directions and it comes back as I don't know why we got to bring a third party. That's my only question. By the way, there's going to be a lot of third parties out there. So I don't know why we have to bring our own in.
No, that's the hard part, because I think, notwithstanding the qualifications of the commissioners, there's a certain level of technical expertise where I think it's good to have someone else just kind of look at it, right? Whether it's whether you're using the right files or whatever, it's a level we're not going to be that comfortable getting into as commissioners. We just don't have the expertise. But I'm very sensitive, and I think Commissioner Yao has brought this up. It's got to be something that's helpful, right? If somebody says, well, here's my alternative set of maps, that's not helpful whatsoever. As opposed to, well, you should have looked at this, by the way. I mean, no offense taken, simply or intended that there's a technical element here that may not have been considered through this whole process, which I think could be very useful if that comes. Now, again, that may not come up, but I think it's good to have the capacity, to have another set of very technical expert eyes saying, okay, you need to look at this as well. And again, Q2 has done a really good job, but maybe they missed something here. And again, I don't think we're in necessarily the best position to have to do that.
Commissioner Barabo might challenge her, so we'll need some outside
as long as the review is based on what Q2 did at our direction, then, and we think we need that, that's fine. But if there's any questions about our direction, then I'm going to have a problem.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. I think ultimately we should be fully accountable as a commission for those lines. I think, again, it's useful to have an extra set of, because we need some specialist eyes that might catch some stuff that we might miss.
That's why I said it may be, if we need one, we have them available, we bring them in. But if it's really clear,
Yeah, well, I guess it's Commissioner Ryan's question was if we need one, because I think
what triggers?
Because even to get to the question, if we need one, we have the option of having somebody.
Yeah.
So I think for purposes of starting the process, we should at least say, let's go put the IFB out, let's see what comes in the door. We can always cancel. I'm saying we can do that.
Exactly.
Yes, Mr. Hunter?
Dan.
I'm sorry.
Commissioner Aguirre and then
Yes.
Dan.
I think it goes back to the purpose of having somebody on staff, and I think the purpose of having an inline review is really to enhance the product. So in that case, then, it's not about balance, in my view. It's not about being adversarial. It's not about trying to catch Q2 doing something wrong. It's about enhancing the product. So I agree that the motion that was made at our last meeting was to look into it and use them as needed, if needed. So in that regard, then, I think we should go forward with the process, put the IFB out, select somebody with the understanding that they understand that we might not call them at all. However, I think as we move forward, there will be some times when we'll look at what Q2 has done, and some of us will say, well, I don't really understand that. Let's bring in somebody else to kind of explain it to us. So in that regard, then, I think that Q2 should probably be letting this individual or entity in on, what their design is, where they're going, and at an appropriate time, then, if we need them, then we ask them to come in, particularly around the first draft and second draft stage, to make sure that we have all the pieces set up. So.
Yeah, Dan.
Well, the first thing I was going to just comment on Commissioner Raya's, where does it trigger? And I'm thinking we call it an inline review because, as Commissioner Yao had accurately reflected at the time we adopted that name, that it really is an in-process review, that's what it was. It is probably easier conceptually to think of it as a peer review that you see in academia, where you present something and then your peers take a look at it and give you comments. On the selection of this individual, it's going to be the same process. You're going to get a group of people, and you're going to go through them, and you're going to, and we're going to be on the road, so this is going to be a little bit more challenging. But you're going to have the opportunity to simply not accept anyone if you're not happy with the candidates that you receive, and you're going to have the opportunity to write or to review the IFB that's written for you to make sure that it contains the scope of work that you believe this person should be presenting, and that can include exactly what Commissioner Yao said, that we expect this to be a positive review to enhance a product, and so we can move towards that line and have that person in place. But if we're going to have it at all, it has to start here, and it should start now.
Okay. Any other comments? Commissioner Yao.
Yeah, just one final comment is, we can ask Q2 to identify the reviewers if it's more comfortable for this commission to take that approach. I don't believe this is the discussion as to whether we should or shouldn't have an in-process review. I thought we finished that discussion a few weeks back. And if we don't set it up now, ahead of time, by the time we, either Q2 wants it or we want it, it'll really be way too late. In other words, it won't happen. So I think the money is available, and if I would perhaps at this point make a recommendation to ask Q2 to incorporate this in-process review as part of their process, and also identify perhaps for us the reviewer that outside of her direct contact that can help her with improving the process and the end product.
No.
Keep in mind, this in-process review, the discussion really is happening as Commissioner Ancheta has identified at the technical level. This is not a review for them to report back to the commission and then for us to give direction to Q2 to modify their output. This is while right before the process is released, have a new set of eyes looking at it, make positive recommendation, and then they can take action on it accordingly.
But my understanding is it goes beyond the technical aspects. It could be a substantive philosophical difference, so there might be a conflict of interest there.
But the point is that we don't want them directing Q2 what to do. They got to come back to us.
Not directing.
I mean, the conversation shouldn't be with Q. I mean, I don't want to turn it over to this peer review person to have the conversation. We're asking them to look at what we asked to have done and how it came out. And then they report to us as a way of improving it. But it shouldn't be at Q2's direction.
Well, maybe we need to have a separate set of discussion again as to what the in-process review is, okay? Because the in-process review is not reviewing the output. It's reviewing the process in terms of coming up with the output. In other words, all those issues that are identified at that point should be worked out before the first draft is released, should be worked out before the second draft is released. It doesn't come back to this commission and then for us to turn around and tell Q2 what to do to change the product. That's not...
I think Dan pointed out that maybe in-process review is the term that we're having trouble with, but I'm looking more for a peer review, and that is not somebody sitting there watching how they're doing things. We hired them because we thought they were capable of doing things. I want to make sure that what they do is what we direct them to do if we feel we have a need to do it. And we may not feel that need.
Well, that's not the...
That's
not what my understanding of this particular topic on this particular agenda today, so.
Okay, any others on this issue?
No, I'm sort of taking a middle position because I would still, I think it's right for the two tech folks to kind of talk to each other, but I want to know, and I think the commission should know before anything gets done, that this is what they talked about and this is what the recommendation from Q2 would be to change things. And I think that should be fully open, but I think we should have that final check, not just the two tech folks or two tech teams sort of working it out. That's my feeling.
Right. And these funds, the funds in the budget are appropriated for a separate function, a different person. And so I don't know that we can necessarily allot these funds into the contract with Q2 because Q2 was given a specific scope of work.
Funding for Q2.
I don't think Q2 even knows about this.
Well, Q2 knows about it. They know about
about them hiring as a subcontractor.
No, I don't think we want to.
That was never part of the conversation.
No.
Okay, any other comments?
Commissioner Antai, you
Yes,
began
Commissioner
to
Pervin.
mention the philosophical aspect of this with the inline or in-process review. And in addition to the technical review or that aspect of Q2's product, I think that the initial concern was that, and we know that Q2 is neither Democrat or Republican, but the primary concern is that the public could be assured that that the product is nonpartisan. So that is an aspect that we should consider with that. I think you were going there, but I heard you begin with that concept.
Okay, so the main question right now, Dan, is you need to put an IFP out, IFB out to hire somebody, and whether we should do it at this point or not because of the expediency issue.
Yes, sir. Well, this is the time to do it so that we can do it right and have the pieces in place so that we can present it to you without necessarily, as you're out on the road and we're having these interim meetings, that we can have the pieces there comfortably so that if we were to miss one 14-day period, we could catch a piece of this process in the next period and not miss the opportunity to have this position in place by the time the first lines are drawn. Or the first maps are drawn. If we wait, 2 weeks further, now it starts to really compress that process. So this is just the natural time to start this process.
I think we should just simply bring it full. I mean, I think there's some, I don't know if it's full consensus at this point, but there's some agreement here that this is an important question. There's some differences on specifics, but I think all of us feel we should really bring this forward as something to really hash out, and then if we can do that tomorrow.
To the full commission.
Then we can give sufficient guidance. Again, if the commission as a whole votes, or, a majority votes to move it forward, then you can get started on it after tomorrow. Right?
All right.
Yes.
Okay, we'll put that on the agenda for tomorrow. Another item, let's move on the delegated authority issue. Dan, could you, number 8?
Right.
Not number 8, what is it? The last item, discussion on interim delegated authority for selected commissioners between commission sessions. Can you explain that again?
It is exactly what I had proposed in that list that I'll be giving to you this afternoon about a selected lead, and that person being able to act on your behalf until you can meet and then approve what they've acted on. And that person would, so to be clear, because Commissioner Blanco had asked for clarity, we would, if that person were on the lead for the technical committee, we would go to the technical advisory committee and say, Commissioner Baraba, this is what we need to do in the interim in order to keep this process rolling. And then we would talk to the chair and the vice chair, and the three could make a decision that in the interim until we meet in full commission, yes, that's the way that the commission should proceed, or no. Just really, it comes back to the issue that we had where there were people who were making accusations that your staff were working without your permission. We weren't working without your permission. We were in consultation with the chair and the vice chair. But this gives us a concrete methodology that we can point to in a concrete way of documenting this process so that all concerned know that we're working on your instructions and your instructions only. So that's the interim delegated authority that we're looking for.
Commissioner Yao.
I would welcome some input from our council as to what items can we take that approach, and what items do we need to call an emergency meeting if something is urgent enough to call the entire commission back together to make those kind of decisions, because I suspect the act severely limit the number of decisions that we can make with fewer than a quorum of the commission.
Well, I apologize.
I thought that when this was brought up and he was sitting here, the council indicated that he thought this would be appropriate.
Well, he did, and it's because of the specific language. What we're saying is making a decision until the commission meets to ratify that decision.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that we could have some issue if it were something of major consequence. But I believe that all of us understand that I believe your chair and your vice chair will recognize something, and we will be in consultation with them. We're talking about issues of, do we post this? Because we don't believe it should be posted. And that type of a decision, that's what I would call a kind of a medium decision. It's not a staff decision to make. It's pretty clear that the two items that we didn't post are, in my mind, are pretty clear. But we want to run that forward and have that to be a decision of the commission, not our decision.
It seems to me this is sort of extending authority too, because I think that the policy has been that the chair has a fair amount of delegated authority, and it's simply sort of expanding the universe. And the chair may want some advice, so they don't feel like they're acting completely unilaterally. But
Always.
But the power is certainly there between meetings. It resides in the chair at least, but this is a way of kind of getting additional input and still. And obviously, it's always the Bagley-Keene stuff, right? Because I think even if you had a lead from a technical committee, that technical committee member might, well, I'm not sure about this one either. Well, maybe I should get some input from at least one other person, maybe. So I understand that it's hard because some of these are tough ones, and you'd love to bring them in front of the full commission, but it's got to be done tomorrow. I'm not acting like as counsel, but I think that's a good, workable solution as long as the commission as a whole feels, well, that's appropriate delegated power. And again, there may be things that are very big that we might just have to push up because it really is so big that I think that's what we have to feel that there's discretion by the chair to.
Does staff have problem just leaning on the chair and the vice chair in making those kind of decisions?
Well, this is also a two-way street. We don't have problems leaning on the chair and the vice chair, but we get, quite honestly, we get a lot of commission traffic outside the chair and the vice chair. So this is not only to go to a specific person and have a specific process for running something forward, but it's also to have a specific process for things flowing down. So it's we would just want to know exactly who we're dealing with for different issues, because sometimes we're dealing with a lot of you. So when I say we're going up, that would be a good example of me saying, we've got this, we don't want to post it. What do you say? On the other hand, if I'm getting calls, or our staff are getting calls from different commissioners wanting different things done, I want to say that needs to flow through your lead, and that needs to flow through your chair, not come directly to us.
Right, and I'm also assuming that some of this is simply to take some of the pressure off of the chair, because there's so many things happening all at once that it allows the chair, in essence, give the chair some power to delegate to a lead, so that person can work on it more specifically rather than the chair having to do everything.
Yeah, adding to that is the chair might not be aware of all the specificity that's going on in the technical advisory or outreach advisory committee, so it's really unfair to the chair, I think.
Oh, absolutely, I agree.
I'm worried about you.
You only got one meeting.
The problem is staff has 14 bosses, and they can't be listening to 14 bosses. So the system is not perfect as we're outlining it because of the constraints of BK, but it's the best we can think of. Does that make sense to everybody?
So what kind of action, do we need to take any action?
No, you're going to report to us tomorrow.
Right, and for this, I'm hoping to see Kermit at any minute. Oh, this is, I can't believe how late Kermit was with this. That's so that Commissioner Bravo won't replace me today.
But he was here, and I think he was disappointed by your comments, so he might have left.
I'm going to distribute this to all of you today to review, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow, and then we'll vote on it next week. In the interim period, we can certainly work with the chair and the vice chair like we've been doing. These sets of guidelines will really come into play and be most important when we're on the road and we're combining meetings and times become very compressed. We just need to know who we're reporting to and who can call in and give instructions. That's really the crux of it. So I don't know that we need to go forward with any action item other than to consider this in full commission tomorrow.
Okay, there's one more item actually I want to talk about, and that is, and this is...
One more question associated with the last item.
Oh, yeah, sure, Commissioner Yao.
Will we have a designated chair and a vice chair for each of the meetings that we hold?
The hearing meetings, right?
I know we have it in a business meeting. So the only other thing is either the input meeting or I guess input meeting is what we have in the month of April. So we probably do need to have a chair and vice chair designated for each and every one of the meetings, right?
I don't know. That's we're entering a phase that we haven't done yet. So in the past, we've been doing it per business meeting, right? So now we have these input meetings coming up, and they're back to back. And my own personal feelings, it could go either way, but I can imagine the chaos it's going to create on the staff.
Yeah, somebody has to run the meeting.
I think that the solution, in the past, it's always been session to session, and a session was always designated as a business meeting. I think that if you keep that, whoever is the interim and chair between sessions would be your chair and your interim and your vice chair at the input meetings, and then when you entered the session, they would pass it over. So if we had 6 input meetings between a session, Commissioner Ontai and Commissioner Gary would be the chair for all 6 input meetings, and then we would have the business meeting, and they would transfer it to the next pair. That would keep our rotation, and it would also give us continuity at the input meetings between sessions.
I'd like to expand on Commissioner Yao's question, because as we get later out into the summer, for example, at the end of June, even the beginning of June, we have nearly a week where potentially, again, these might shift a little bit, but where we'd have essentially a week of a business meeting where the commission was directing the line drawer. So is the thinking then that that the chair and vice chair on June 1, as this calendar is created, would be the chair and vice chair through that entire stretch through the 6th?
In my mind, that would be considered one session.
How about the 10th? That's standing alone.
I'll take that session.
We don't have any meeting. We don't have a meeting.
We don't have a meeting, but we would somewhere. So if we released these, if we met all the way through the 9th, and right now I would say to you that they left those blank because we had the commission directs the line drawer through the 6th. Now these dates, you could choose to be radical and not meet that weekend, and move into these dates directing the line drawer. Then you would release the draft maps. Now you would go out of session, and then somewhere down here on the 23rd or 24th, I would imagine you would have one of our business meetings that would coincide with the Region 8 and Region 7 meetings. If that occurred, then whoever was the vice chair and chair for those meetings would be your vice chair and chair from the 16th, 17th, 18th, and on. And that would all be considered, in my mind, one session, and that way we don't get involved with handing the baton off a lot.
Okay, I think.
Commissioner Colombo Maloney, did that make sense to you?
It makes sense to me. I think that the intention between the reason that we established a rotating leadership structure was also to spread the joy and the burden of being chair. And so as we start to get farther into this process, there may be a longer lapse time between business meetings. We're talking versus, a 1 to 3 day stretch of serving as chair. You're looking at potentially like 9 days or of times where we're actually in session of some sort, be it a business meeting or a public meeting. So I just suggest that's something for staff to explore along with Q2 as you come back with a draft map, that we should think about. Maybe it's by region, and that you have a chair and vice chair that are doing a region, all of Region 1, for example, and then we pass the baton, or some other structure to, again, shift it around more often.
Could you give that some thought? Dan?
Well, no, first of all, the one thought I would have is that I don't know of any commission who rotates their chair. So in San Diego, they had, Mr. Pescara, I believe, was the chair for the entire thing. And certainly in Arizona, their chair remained the chair for the entire thing. So we don't really have any basis for making this determination. From the staff standpoint, it made sense that we keep it in session only because we'd already worked out the sessions. And so it was just one less thing to do. But now we have this thought, and you have to make that decision as to whether you want it to rotate like that. If you want it to rotate like that, then we'll go back and we will rearrange the line of succession. But
I think the rotating schedule will work for the rest of the schedule.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if to superimpose the rotating chairmanship or chair over the calendar, so we have a rough idea of who's going to be chairman.
And of course, for us to do that, we have to agree on the calendar.
Yeah.
Chicken or the egg?
Yeah. Commissioner DiGiulio.
Excuse me, because I came in late to this. Did you talk about what the role of the chair for the input hearings is? Do we know what the role?
What does the chair do?
I think Commissioner Galambos-Malloy has a point that there could be a lot of extra work when you're a chair for a large number of meetings, but maybe it would help to know what the responsibilities of the input hearing. If they're more minimal, maybe that's not as burdensome as we're thinking.
So to start with, I'd like to tell you that we had given that a vast amount of consideration, but in actuality, I'm only thinking about it right now. And what I would say is that we're taking input. We're going to arrive. We're going to have a central board. We have to have somebody to give the opening comments and the closing comments. And after that, you're all going to be asking for clarification, and then we're going to be shutting down and leaving. So it's difficult for me to see. There's no real speaking role.
So there's not a lot of, I think probably the issue, if I have not been a chair, but from what I've seen, is there's a significant amount of work when you are chair in the preparation before the meeting. But it seems to me that at the input hearings, there may be some consultation, but the role of the chair for the input hearings will really be just to kind of coordinate the actual meeting, not necessarily a lot of work ahead of time, or am I just hopeful?
No, there'll be the work ahead of time for the upcoming business sessions because that will remain. Now that I think about it, there'll be the chair will probably have to make some decisions regarding the information that we've received. But I mean, that's going to go out to all the commissioners. You all have to get the same summary report. I mean, there will undoubtedly be some decisions that we're not thinking about right now that are going to have to be made by the chair, but I think that they're going to be kind of ad hoc decisions that mainly we're looking at opening up the opening ceremonies and closing ceremonies, and that's about it.
Mr. Claypool, so as we've asked for the more detailed work plan on what the input hearings will entail, just put that on your list of things to consider and to think through in more detail. And if it becomes that the job of the chair over many weeks of time is going to be so onerous, then perhaps we could look at other ways of dividing this up. But I just don't think we have the information right now to be clear one way or the other.
So you want more than 5 minutes of consideration? We can give you an entire hour. I mean, that's what we've got. No, we'll do that, certainly.
And I'll make one other observation, and that is that when you look at April, with all the input hearings that we're going to have throughout the month, it's hard for me to imagine that after we swing into these, that there is not going to be a need for us to come together and deal with some of the issues that are going to be coming up. So, and the same thing during May. We really do not have any business meetings at all. And certainly as an organization, there are decisions that are going to be coming up that we will all need to come together to discuss. So my suggestion might be to consider scheduling some business meetings mid-month, perhaps in April, during the week of 18th through the 22nd, maybe late in the week, as placeholders for potential necessity of having to come together, and doing the same in May, somewhere in mid-month. Even if it's one day of a scheduled meeting, if we don't need it, we don't need to meet. But if we need it, we need to set it up.
The calendar that you're looking at is the one that was put together by Q2. If you look at the calendar we have put together for you, we were scheduling business meetings every 2 weeks in the same rotation. And so once we get this settled, we're going to drop them in. I would think that every 2 weeks, coming back to Commissioner Galamos-Malloy's thought, the 2 weeks is probably going to be enough, just putting together the meeting and with whatever we have going. So we're thinking in terms of that 2-week rotation the same way we have now.
One of the other things to consider is that in some of these places where we're going, where you might be in a very close same area, that since we won't have anything to do during the day, it might be that we could slip in a meeting during the day where we all get together because we're going to be there that evening. I mean, that's always a possibility.
You read my mind.
And that's true. Again, it's locating that area 14 days in advance.
Well, I mean, it just seems to me we've been making this artificial distinction between, business meetings, and the only thing about the input hearing is that we need to consider the time that we have it and make sure that there's good access for the public. But we're going to be there anyway, and we'll be, able to meet if we want to. So the only consideration, I think, is just making sure we agendize it to give ourselves the flexibility to meet when we have issues that come up.
Right. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Any other questions down here on the left row? On here in the right row?
I just wanted to add that while not officially designated a chair or vice chair, I do see that the commissioner that has a connection to that particular region to have an active role in terms of being visible and sort of giving it a personal face to, for example, Riverside or wherever we may be, or wherever, Ventura, wherever we may be from, just to sort of step up during those occasions that we are representing those regions.
Okay, so I'm kind of an ambassador at large, and I certainly appreciate that role. With the rotation that we've got right now, it's staggered politically and so forth. So I don't know how we drop one in and drop one out and keep it workable. However, I do believe that that your staff will be leaning on every commissioner who has a location, because as I understood it, Commissioner Raya had volunteered her home for a party. but that might have been last session. Things may have changed. I don't know.
Okay, there's just one more item that I want to try to wrap up, and that is the issue, and this is a discussion with the commissioners themselves. Do you feel that prior to these input meetings that we all should have some type of briefing information on the city or the region that we're going to be visiting, background, census data, geography? Is there some common background information that we should have in our hands prior to these regional meetings? So I see everybody nodding. Well, that was easy.
It'll give staff something to do.
I would only say here, I'm going to jump in, because we did kind of ask, when we consulted with Q2, which at the time was Karen McDonald and Anna Henderson, we asked them this question, and we've heard this from the public, is we have to be very careful that we don't look like we're making decisions about a community before we go in there. So there's a very big distinction about how much information you get about a community before you even have a chance for the community to tell you about itself. In the discussion, the recommendation from Q2 was really to go in with a blank slate as much as possible, but I think this commission has really struggled with wanting to have a sense of the community before we go into it. So I'd like to hear the discussion points from the commissioners about their suggestions for balancing that.
Commissioner Brock.
There's the general Chamber of Commerce description of our community. And that's probably what we should shoot for. Then that way, that's what's generally available, and we could go get that ourselves, but it would just make it easier if we all got the same thing. And if it was the Chamber of Commerce pitch for the county or the area, that would be sufficient.
So you're suggesting something that's publicly already available about the area? We're not asking staff to run numbers?
No special studies.
I wanted to clarify for the public because I think that was an issue that's been brought to our attention quite a bit, that that's our intention in receiving this data, this information about a community.
Like, as an example, the first meeting in Reddings, I would want input on the entire North California as far as a broad picture is concerned.
Yeah, so you're talking, even though we're meeting in Reading, it's not about Reading, it's about the region.
It's about that whole region that we're seeking information. So
Stan, can you package us some information?
Okay.
Commissioner DiGiulio, didn't Q2 originally put together information on each of those regions?
When they originally had given us, along with the maps and things in terms of the determination, I think what there was information about if I'm correct, if I'm remembering, there was information about the region in terms of their methodology for breaking down the counties into the regions. I apologize, but I don't remember off the top of my head if there was specific information about the characteristics of those regions.
Well, it had an ethnic breakdown, it had, there was some, how many people were in the region, stuff like that.
So you're correct, you're right. There was some justification because based on their methodology, it was based on some population characteristics, some, I think, initial geography. So you're right. I think we could probably reference that information was given to us in Claremont, as I recall.
I have that information here. So, let's see. CRC regions final. So, unfortunately, I can't. These haven't been provided. I think they may have been provided to the public a long time ago. But what it does give us by region, it gives us area population. It gives us demographics. It gives us industry. For instance, San Diego's economy is led by manufacturing, particularly in the area of shipbuilding and repair industry, machinery and computers, metal products. Agriculture is the largest industry and accounts for 48% of all employment. So, and then it gives us an ethnic breakdown, and it does that for each of the regions. So.
That's right, I remember saying that. Yeah,
Commissioner Dye.
Okay.
I knew you were here for a reason to pop in the bed.
I just don't want to recreate the wheel here.
Yeah. So do we need to direct staff to prepare that information? It's already there.
They've already got it. They can just distribute it.
We'd be happy to take Q2's data and then put our name on it and distribute it to you.
Repackage it. Oh.
Okay.
It already has been distributed, so.
Okay, all right.
Taking full credit.
So I think that's the one item left that we wanted to complete. Are there any comments or any additional items members want to talk about? Yes.
Another good source of information is from the League of California Cities. They divide the entire state into, I believe, 16 separate divisions. And I suspect that if we ask them to provide somebody to come in and give us a broad stroke picture of their one or two division that covers our region, I suspect that they can do that without a lot of preparation as well. Because, as I said, they represent all of Californians, and those informations are right on the fingertip. So I'll be happy to make that contact if you direct me to do so, or else staff can do the same thing. So.
Will it harm?
No, it wouldn't. And in fact, I was also going to suggest that we work through the very generous offer of the California Chamber of Commerce has also asked to provide us with help, and they'd be an excellent source for information as well.
Excellent.
And we have a representative here, and we had a representative here, and I'm sure that she would be glad to work with us. So,
excellent.
So we'll gather that information, try to flesh out these regions as well as we can.
Okay, with that, I want to ask my chair, shall we adjourn?
Sure, oh yeah, how about if we, can we take a...
Public comment?
If we say 5, it'll be 10, so if we say 5 minutes, would that be, it's 4:23, so we get back
Yeah.
at 4:30, is that okay?
Yes.
Chairwoman?
Oh, chair. Our chair is here. Well,
Thank you.
And then we'll go into public comment.
It's a good way to do it quickly and efficiently.
introduce as a candidate for our administrative assistant position, Mr. Lon Leach. As I described earlier, he has a background in marketing, production, and technology. He's going to work with us to travel with the commission, and the daunting task of traveling with this commission through all of our input meetings. And with no further ado, Lon.
Thank you.
All right. No endorsement speech. No.
He's waiting to do an acceptance speech. So I need a.
So what do we need? Do we need a motion?
We need a motion. We need a supermajority.
Supermajority? Okay.
We do.
I so move.
Do I have a second?
Second, right.
Commissioner Raya, second. Public comment? Hearing no public comment? I don't think we need, it's a supermajority vote.
Yes, the statute doesn't
Yeah.
discriminate among the types of staff and consultants, so I think that's the right interpretation.
We're okay. All right, I think even though we have a couple of commissioners doing some other business right now, I think we can go ahead. And can you do a roll?
Commissioner Aguirre?
Yes.
Commissioner Anchetta? Commissioner Blanco?
Yes.
Commissioner Dye?
Yes.
Commissioner Raya?
Yes.
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Yes.
Commissioner Forbes?
Yes.
Commissioner Columbus Malloy?
Yes.
Commissioner Parvenu?
Yes.
Commissioner Baraba?
Yes.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber? Commissioner Antai? Commissioner Ward? Commissioner Yao?
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. Welcome aboard.
I'll ask him to hold his acceptance speech to under our 3 minutes.
Do you have something you'd like to say?
Just that I'm excited to be a part of this process and to work with you all. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now Mr. Wilcox is gone, who is going to give us a little wrap-up, but first we'll have public comment. Do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
Hi, my name is Tony Lafferty. I'm with Esri, and we recently submitted a cost proposal regarding online redistricting and public access and participation tools for your consideration.
Thank you. Any, yes, Mr. Cochran?
Actually, and Mr. Lafferty, if you could tell us the wonderful tool you have in your hand that will.
Okay. So when you had your recent commentary about when you go to a location and you're trying to find out information about that area, about the people that live there and what their situation is, one of the things we have is everything now is an app, right? And one of the things we do is we've provided Business Analyst Online, and it's an app on the App Store. It's a free app. And what you can do is we have bundled business statistics and demographic information about the U.S. So if you type in an address or a city, it will go to that centroid and provide you an access point of the information about that community that you're visiting. So in this case, we look at different types of population that are there, median age, the unemployment rate, those kind of things. So you'd have that available for you when you go to travel. So that's a free app, Business Analyst Online.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Well,
We actually have one more thing that we had discussed earlier, and Kirk just brought it up to
Okay.
mind to me. And that is that we need, because we have to post our agenda for the 7th and the 8th, we need agenda items for the advisory committees for the 7th, because it has to post by midnight this evening.
Okay.
And if we could identify full commission issues at the same time, that would be the best practice. We've then post everything at once if we can.
Okay, so let's, maybe the way to do this, I'm going to look at today's agenda more just to sort of spot possible areas that usually, and we'll start first with general business items, and then we'll go to potential advisory committee items. So, we will hopefully tomorrow adopt a calendar. Is that correct? Yes? Okay. Are there items related to that calendar and to subsequent meetings that might have to be discussed at our next business meeting? Can we get more specific? Anybody?
Calendar updates?
Calendar updates about places, times, et cetera? Okay.
We have the document that I gave you regarding the changes we'd like to have for the commission lead. I'm not sure that, I believe that probably runs through the Finance and Administrative Committee for a topic.
Is it possible to conclude that tomorrow, or is the commission far enough along in its discussions to permit that?
I think, let's see if we can even do it tomorrow. I know that this was, you'll be glad to know, an item of much discussion in the Legal Advisory Committee, and we have some thoughts and recommendations. So it's
Excellent.
Possible we can take care of this tomorrow.
The sooner the better. Thank you.
Okay. Do we anticipate any other trainings?
Yeah, we would like to arrange the VRA training, different issues, but additional training for the next meeting. That's
Okay.
correct.
So that'll be on there.
Sure.
What was that?
And possibly PRA training as well. The
PRA, if you're not a state insider, is Public Records Act, and it is something that you should have a familiarity with.
Great. Will we have a report on any of the issues related to Q2, for example, where their contract is at, or will that be settled by then and we won't need to discuss it, or?
Well, I believe our goal would be just to report back that we've completed that agreement. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's not an item. Do you believe that Q2 will have anything on the agenda for that meeting?
I don't think so. I think that for now they know which way their course is set. We will have, however, if we have the vote tomorrow to proceed with the RFI for the inline process / peer review contract, we should have at that point have a document that in draft for your review. And so I'm assuming that who would that go through? Would that be the technical? I guess is that technical was the one that did the
They
line
did
drawing consultant.
that bid, so.
So we'll move
we'll
that
run
to
it
the
through
technical
them.
committee.
Rephrase that for me, or us?
We'll need to review the potential scope
Scope of work.
and
for the RFI.
for the RFI for the in-process review.
Yes.
Will there be last-minute either refinements, decisions because of the input meetings that that you think we'll have to deal with at the meeting? Will we have to review, for example, the toolkit?
Yes.
It seems to me, yeah. But I mean, are we going to have to discuss it in full commission at the next commission meeting? In other words, do we need to be trained on it before we go out? All the commissioners?
There was discussion that you'll hear about this a little bit tomorrow, a lot tomorrow probably, but we would have liked to have had something that had the complete content for how that will be run on from the line drawing team. But unfortunately, with it just being 4 days ago, they have no contract. There was just no way to have a complete list of methodology and the structure for public input. So this will be a point of discussion for tomorrow, but you're right, the reality is we're trying to get it as refined as we can with input from the incoming chair and vice chair, and I guess we're not making a decision about a committee lead, so that when we come back in the next meeting, we'll be able to vote on that accept that as a full commission if we'd like to, knowing that it's a short period of time, but we're up against the wall, there's only a certain amount of time, so we are directing staff and our Q2 consultant to get those materials ready for us so that we can review and be ready to go.
So we'll both review and approve the materials, but will we need to know how to use them before we go out? Is there sort of a training component to the use of the materials?
I believe unless Q2 adds some portion to the component that is very, very technical, and I wouldn't think they would because they're sending out to the public at all levels. I would think that they would be fairly self-explanatory, but certainly I think that there will be a need for a presentation because you're going to want to know what materials you're providing to the public.
Correct. It'll be our last meeting before we go out into the field, correct?
It will be, yes.
So do we need to have a run-through, a discussion about how we are going to conduct? I know that I heard that was being discussed, but...
That's the technical
Well,
committee.
I know, but we're deciding on the agenda for the next commission meeting.
But that's included, that's what Gil and I were just making sure that's included in what we're putting on the technical team agenda, but that's a good point, though. Does it need to be simply on the technical and outreach, because that element is a part of what we're trying to agendize for the advisory committee, but if we report out, does that cover it to the extent that you need, or would you like to have it as a separate item for the full commission?
I think if we're going to, from there, I haven't looked at the calendar, I don't know if we're doing it back-to-back as originally was envisioned, where we were going to meet and then go out. If that's the case, and even if it's not back-to-back, we'll meet and then have a meeting soon thereafter. I think we need to have a discussion at the full commission about how we're going to run the hearings. And I know that I overheard discussion when I walked in, but not all of us were at that meeting. So I would think that we need to have a plan for us to know how to proceed at these meetings.
Well, and first of all, yes, we go 7th Sacramento, 8th Sacramento, 9th Reading, and then 10th Yuba City. So we do have that, and I understand what Commissioner DiGiulio is saying. I think we will report what we found as far as what we intend the meeting to be and how we intend to run it. We'll report into the technical committee, and then they'll report out, and that may suffice for
Agenda
a representation.
item, so it'll be subsumed under a report back item?
I believe so.
Okay, I got it.
But the point is, we've got to make that notice as of tonight, right?
Right, but if we have it, yeah.
There's a glitch that comes up,
That's right.
and the whole commission needs to have some discourse on it. That won't be on the agenda.
But you could just have a discussion when you report out.
I think Commissioner Ante is saying that since this is to be able to notice that meeting, we need to either specifically in the in the advisory committee agenda in a very specific way, or in the agenda for the full meeting, we need to capture this for the notice.
Either way, maybe
Yeah.
it's a legal
Well, I think, let's put it this way, it's a part of, with the discussion we had, that was one of the elements, because it was a very critical element. So are we covered if in the Technical Outreach Advisory Committee, we have that as a part of discussion, because it'll encompass, we have the review of the input meeting operations, that would be from staff, and then also a review of, for lack of, we're trying to find a good word for it, but a review of what Q2 would provide for the public input structure. And then if we're able to cover those sub-points, I mean, with this time we had 11 items on our technical advisory committee, technical outreach. I don't keep meaning to exclude outreach, but technical/outreach. That level of detail we can cover in a general heading. So I think if we have a general heading, then we can have those elements discussed, and then we can report back to the full commission on all those issues. Am I incorrect?
Okay, so I
You're-
think, no, go ahead.
Yes, we'll specify that
Right.
this is a subject matter for discussion in your committee. And then I think part two here is that because this is of unusual importance for the full commission,
Right.
it would make sense to allow you a longer report out committee time than
Exactly.
the other committees have, and then you can pick it up as part of that report out.
Thank you. All right. Will we have any pressing administrative business that you think we're going to, I mean, it's always on the agenda, but are there going to be some decision items, do you think? Or we'll just calendar the administrative business?
Only the ones that we had discussed earlier, where we're asking for a decision on the leads, that issue, but unless we take care of it tomorrow.
I think we might take care of it
Okay.
tomorrow. Yeah, Commissioner, yeah?
Can I ask to have Q2 give us a detailed presentation on their map drawing process? In other words, similar to the detail that we look at today on the census data. How do they do the map drawing besides just getting on a computer and pushing buttons?
If we were able to have them on board and available, I would support that. I think even though what we're doing not immediately thereafter is going out and receiving input and not necessarily drawing, I think we will be better informed about what we're hearing and what its use is if we have a mini training about how all this information ends up being put together. I do think it'll give us some context for when we're receiving information on the road.
Then perhaps it would be appropriate to ask them for not only that training, but also what our relationship will be with their line drawer in the field and how that information transfers across.
Correct. I think
Okay.
both of those things, but a hands-on kind of presentation. Yes, Commissioner Filkins-Weller?
And won't it help each commissioner be able to interact with the public and ask appropriate questions so that we could solicit sufficient information for our line drawer? So if her focus could be, how we could help the public when they're presenting their information to us, if we know how she's going to do it, it might help facilitate questioning.
And just to know that these are very good points, but these are things that are on we discussed it in the technical and outreach. So these are things that I think are of serious concern for all of us and commissioners, and we have that on our radar, just to reassure you that we are aware of these.
Right, we're just trying to put the agenda together, so if we're on the same page, that's
But
great.
I guess I'm just trying to decide if we talk, is it helpful for us to notify you that it's on our agenda as well, or would we like to actually add it to the full agenda too? I guess if I'm trying to point out that it's on our agenda, is that enough for the commissioners that have concerns about this, or would you like for it to be expanded to the full agenda?
I'm not clear on what you mean by on your agenda.
These elements that have been raised by yourself and Commissioner Filkins-Weber, correct me if I'm wrong, did we have a discussion about
I
it?
think the advisory committee is a independent governing, not independent, but a identifiable governing body. So you put together your agenda. I don't believe that automatically it is part of the entire commission's agenda.
I guess I'm sorry, I just thought it was that we would report out based on those agenda items. So I just was trying to decide on the technical side if it was a redundancy.
I
if
don't
we
know
were planning on reporting
whether it's
out.
safest to.
I was only referring to Q2's
Right,
mini
that's what I
training
was too,
session. I
yeah.
wasn't overlapping on
sorry.
any.
You're talking about that.
No, we're talking about Q2 training. Commissioner Baraba?
My impression that if it's on an advisory committee's agenda, we're accountable to report out to the full commission what we discussed.
Correct. I think maybe, I'm not sure where the confusion is here. I think some people have requested that part in the general session, not because we're making decisions based on recommendations that come out of the advisory committee, but that as part of our meeting, just like today, we had 2 trainings, that we have a training on map drawing that helps us as we're going into the next 3 or 4 days of input hearings. That's what I understand us to be discussing.
Okay, that's what I understand as well. I don't
Yeah.
know if you had discussed it earlier, but out of,
No, that's.
Right, and I think that this is, that maybe possibly the confusion is that we asked for agenda items because we have to post this agenda tonight.
oh, tonight, that's
Yeah.
right.
Right, so
Then-
that's where we're working from right now,
Right.
is just making sure everything gets on the map so that we expand it less than we normally do.
Mr. Miller, did we, when we just left legal advisory, we were talking about a training session with Gibson Dunn, and so I think we would probably need to add that for the agenda, so if you can work with Mr. Claypool on the language for this portion of the agenda and Gibson Dunn's presentation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Claypool, what do you think the likelihood is that we'll be
Can you
able...
speak up? I'm sorry.
Mr. Claypool, what do you think the likelihood is that we will have a candidate to consider for the final staff position by the next meeting?
I hope that it's good, because we have two people who have applied, and we're going to continue. We have a 2-week period. We really need that person on board. From that, because that person will probably be the 4th person traveling with us, the way we're staffing. So, very good, so we need to add that as well.
Commissioner
All right.
Blanco, we add that one?
Yeah. So can we, quickly but slowly, list what we have for the next meeting, and including whatever, oh no, and then the last thing we have to do is we have to, if possible, have the advisory committees give us what's going to be on their advisory committee agenda as specifically as possible. So we can do that as well. And that'll save a lot of the back and forth, although there'll still be some additions or deletions, but that could help us quite a bit. So maybe we can start with the Public Information Advisory Committee. What do you envision as being on your agenda at the next meeting? It may be discussion and possible report out with recommendation.
I would say the public input meeting communications plan, probably anything to do with the website, as we are hoping to get that live, but to get that still to talk about, maybe, I don't know if we'll have to revisit public comments, but those are the two that come to my mind right now.
Yeah, this would be just ongoing, probably report
Yeah.
outs.
Okay. And if there's something else, the lead or liaison will let Mr. Ontai know, and he will in turn communicate that to staff. Technical Advisory Committee, what do you see as your agenda for the next meeting?
Can we,
Technical and outreach.
okay, this is what we're going to combine. The first one would be a discussion of input hearing calendar. The second would be the review of operational structure and format for input hearings. The third would be the review of technical structure and content of public input at hearings. The fourth would be guidelines for commissioners at public input hearings. The fifth would be census data update. Number 6 would be public access to redistricting. And 7 would be inline process review, IFB.
Could I add one more item? And I'm not sure if this belongs with technical or might be legal, but I'd like to get us started on thinking about the racially polarized voting analysts, because again, this is, I'm assuming, competitive bidding once again, so that we should just get started on that discussion.
So,
It could be technical, assuming it's technical, we could just take it started in technical, I would assume.
I think there are overlapping legal issues.
Yeah.
Maybe we can
How
add
you
to
wanna do
legal
it?
too.
maybe you could rephrase that for Ms. Vargas.
Well, it's simply some discussion at technical and/or legal regarding the IFB and other specifics regarding the quantitative analyst position, which will focus primarily on racially polarized voting and Voting Rights Act compliance.
So, a discussion, we'll hold off on where this will take place, a discussion on the need for why, like, actually have a discussion about do we and why do we need this person, what type of person. And then this could result in a recommendation to draft a bid.
Yeah, I think we might want to direct Mr. Miller to check in with Gibson Dunn in between now and now and the next meeting, so we can get some legal opinions regarding what we do in fact need to think about for this position.
Mr. Claypool?
And we'll also, I've asked Jenny to write down, we may not need an IFB on this just because of the specialization nature of it. We'll look into the different ways we might be able to do this without going through such a cumbersome process.
Can I recommend that on that issue, that be thrown over to the legal committee?
That's fine.
Whatever, yeah.
Legal? Yeah?
I got it.
All right.
And
I
only-
wanted to show up someplace.
Yeah, and that reminded me when Commissioner Anchetta, was it you, Commissioner Blanco, that had suggested also there, was that for, something was punted to us about it reviewing the scope of work for an RFI for the in-process review?
Yes,
Would you
that
like to
was
get
punted to you.
Would you like that on the agenda?
I don't think that's legal.
I mean, I'm saying, would you like that on technical? So
Oh,
I should
yes,
add
that should be on technical, yeah.
Just want to clarify.
Yeah.
So review of the scope of work for an RFI for in-process, or we could just say review of the RFI for in-process review? Would that be nice?
Yeah, and I think there it's really coming up with what the scope is, what we're really talking about, and then turning it over to staff to figure out what to do with that.
Right, and perhaps a starting point would be for us to draft a scope of work based on what we've heard, give it to you, and then, because it's always easier to edit, and then you can make it into what you want from there.
That sounds, yes, okay, let's proceed that way. Commissioner Yao?
Can we put a catch-all type of category in there, perhaps with labor, as discussion of map join parameters, so that if there is time, we can start discussing things like where should we start the map, what part of the state should we use as a starting point in drawing our map, whether it's the Section 2 and 5 districts, or whether we start from San Diego and work north, or start from north and work south, and so on. In other words, these are not key discussion right now, but at least when the topic comes up, it will be on the agenda that will allow us to discuss it in some detail. It's a placeholder.
Yeah. So here's my recommendation, because we have about 30 seconds in this building, which is that we not do that at this following meeting, but that we use the time between this meeting and the next one to actually begin to work with Q2 in whatever form that takes, to have them begin to maybe present us with options about what the principles should be that are our guiding principles. How do we start, all the things that sort of we're going to be, in a sense, policy decisions that we have to make about how we proceed. And I think it's probably too soon to do that, given everything that we're asking them to do, and we don't really need to get there yet as we're doing the input, but let's strive to have that at the following business meeting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Would you put over the adoption of the principles and the guidelines for the following meeting, or would you want that as part of the training session?
If they're prepared to, what I think would be good in the training session is not for us to hear it and be prepared to adopt principles, but for them to give us examples of what it means to have principles that you use for redistricting, so that we then know what we're looking for when we have that conversation, if that makes sense. All right? Yes.
Real quick, I'm sorry, Commissioner DeGiulio, I missed your second to last one. It had something to do with redistricting.
Public access to redistricting.
That narrows it down.
I'm sorry, public.
It's a carryover. It's public access.
All right.
We're getting punchy.
Yes. Well,
Do we need to summarize legal for the
yes,
agenda?
that's our next thing. Oh, summarize legal?
For the
No, we're going to have Mr. Wilcox summarize the day.
But identify.
I'm sorry, for the agenda.
Oh, yes, for the agenda, yeah.
The
Yeah,
legal
sorry.
advisory
Yeah,
agenda.
Yeah, sorry.
We're going to have a report back regarding Mr. Miller's anticipated meeting between Gibson Dunn and Q2, which is going to take place next week. And any commission action items to be addressed after that meeting. We are going to discuss the results of the Q2 firewall negotiation and the status of contract with Q2. We're going to discuss legal advisory recommendations regarding commissioners' use of internet mapping programs not authorized by the commission, such as those of Google Maps and the Advancement Project that we saw at the civic engagement. That was a task that the commission charged us to look into. We have also developed a category for our designated lead, which is myself, to report back to the advisory committee regarding issues or decisions that have been made in between our business meeting and before the next meeting. And the final item, which we've added since the legal advisory, the legal necessity for racial polarized voting information, parameters for such, and our VRA attorney's recommendation regarding the issue.
All right.
And those are a little specific, but.
Finance and Administrative Committee?
Well, since the Finance Administration Committee is the only one that didn't get to meet this time, we have some carryovers from last
Yeah.
time, but I'm assuming much of that will be dealt with, hopefully. It's just a status update on those, right?
So we'll just, whatever's on there, we'll carry over the way it reads in this agenda?
Right now, the way it reads is the Department of Finance letter for the approval of current year augmentation, the budget change proposal, which will be for the next year, and the status of hiring.
Right, and those will still carry over, and I'm hoping for good news in at least 2 of the 3 categories.
That's right. Do we need anything else on the move or anything else?
No?
Okay, I think we're good.
All right. Do we need a budget review? Like, how are we doing our
Yeah,
burn rate?
we had a standing item in here before that was budget and budget augmentation, which included a review of the burn rate, and, you know, we had asked for budget and variance.
I think that should be a monthly event as compared to be a
When was the
weekly
last time we
event,
did that?
Well, we haven't really ever done that because we haven't had anybody on board to do that. We just received Ms. Davis's
That's
services,
right.
and so she's working towards that right now. The big thing is the BCP.
Right.
After that's done, all these other reports will follow on fairly
Okay.
quickly.
You let us know when we think it's possible to do that.
Can we just
But
put?
but we should put it on there. and-
Yeah,
and-
budget review.
Yeah, let's put it on there as a
General
standard item, and then
Sure.
we'll see whether we can.
I can
overpay for
tell
it.
you that we ran through the numbers with the Department of Finance, and you still have over $2 million left. So that's the best I can do at this point.
Okay.
But you're not broke. And
Okay,
we're going to get
well,
more.
that's really good news.
Just for clarity, would that be a committee report or a full commission report?
Well, it would, of course, be reported back to the
Report,
full
but to
committee.
the committee
Yeah.
initially, and then you'll make the report back to the full commission.
Yeah, the committee's asked for these reports for a while, but, you know, as Mr. Claypool pointed out, we were lacking a budget officer before.
And I'm sorry, just one other.
Yes.
One other item for legal, which we like to maintain some of our general categories. Could we just add item number 1 that's on our agenda already? Consideration of commission legal obligations and governance matters, because that's broad enough that we were able to sock in a lot today under that category.
And maybe these should just be standing items that always carry.
Well, we
over.
do have those. They didn't necessarily get reflected, but we do have some standing items for the advisory committees. We've kind of lost our way a little bit, but maybe we can go back to them. All right. If nobody else has something to add, I am going to ask Mr. Wilcox to give us our sum up.
All right, the commission had 2 trainings today, one with the statewide database and the other in the Voting Rights Act. The 14 commissioners participated in the filming of the commission's outreach video. The advisory committees met, and the executive director gave his report, and the commission discussed and gave direction on items for the next meeting agenda.
Thank you. And we stand adjourned. Oh, sorry. Up, public comment. We did it, I know, but we did it once, we'll do it again. We just did it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you were out. We just did it.
Meeting with our executive producer.
Yes, just a reminder for us, for the public, that tomorrow's meeting will be held in room 126 of the state capitol. We will commence at 9 a.m. and we will go till close of business, and hopefully close of business will be 5 o'clock.
Earlier. Thank you. So, I really felt like I was an actor in a debate with the executive producer.